This happened about 37 years ago, so some of the events that happened are now long forgotten, but the main events are burned deeply into my memory, and shall be until the day I die. I know many of you will find my story hard to believe, but it did happen, and scared the crap out of me. It happened to me and my then at the time boyfriend, who later became my husband and now ex-husband, Alec. If what I'm about to tell you would have just happened to me, I may have just thought it was my imagination running rampant, but we both experienced it. On this particular evening, Alec came over to pick me up from my parents' home for a date. We decided to eat at one of our favorite burger joints. We went through the drive-thru, and we opted to eat in the car so that we could have each other to ourselves and be able to chat without interference from others. Everything was going fine, normal. Then after we ate, we decided to go parking, for we were 17 and that's what teenagers want to do. We went to a road that we had gone to before to make out. The road was perfect for making out, as there was a field and a farm on one side, and you could see houses from there, and they were set far apart from each other. We take off from the restaurant and head for the road. This is where things start to get weird. All of a sudden I got the feeling of being watched. You know the feeling. It felt like someone was watching us from the back seat, and I was scared and freaked out. I just knew that there was no one in the back. The only time Alec and I had ever been out the car was when he came to get me from my parents' house. I desperately tried to ignore the feeling, but I had to look, and summoned up all the courage and did, already knowing no way could anyone be there. And yep, no one. Yet the feelings didn't go away, and throughout our drive, I had to periodically check the back seat, only to find it, as you guessed it, empty. Just as empty as the time before, and the time before that. We finally arrive at the road, as we called it. We came through the back. We knew the name of it then, but it has since erased from my memory. We start making out, and I'm still feeling uncomfortable, with the fear and feeling of being watched persisting. Here I have to say that neither I nor my boyfriend were on drugs or under the influence of alcohol. But not too long into our makeout session, things got even stranger. I started to feel different, act different, and I wasn't like I was myself. Well, at least not fully. It was like someone or something was trying to take over my body, and only had just so much of hold. It felt like I was becoming a passenger in my own body, and the feeling of being watched had left. Even Alec was acting differently. It was very hard to explain. The way we touched, kissed, and the things we said and so forth were completely different. Our sessions didn't last long when we pulled back from each other, and both said the same thing, that we need to get off the road. Both of us had an uneasy feeling, a feeling that something bad was imminent. We knew that we weren't acting ourselves. I mean, after being around someone for a year or so, you know how each other acts when making out, and we both definitely weren't acting right. Yet we had no control over it, so we straightened our clothes and booked it off the road. I still to this day don't understand what exactly happened to us or why, but whatever you were, I'd rather not encounter you again. This next story commences on April of '87. Alec and I had been married for around 2.5 years now, and had just recently moved. We were in our 20s, and very excited to be moving into our home. We'd also purchased our first puppy, a beautiful Australian Shepherd mix, who we affectionately nicknamed Specs. Our life consisted of work, each other, making a home, and our fur baby, Specs. I need to mention the home we moved into had been Alex's grandparents. His father had died in the home back in the 70s from a heart attack, in what later became our boys' room. I never got to meet his grandfather. I met his grandmother when Alec and I started dating, and I adored her. But her declining health meant that she was placed in a nursing home by Alec's mother. She didn't last long after going there, and died at the same time this story begins in April of '87 in the nursing home. Some background on Grandma. She was born in Poland and came over to the US as a young girl, met and fell in love with his grandfather. Grandma was the type of woman who had to make sure you were fed and watered, even though if you had just eaten, there was still something of it. Saying you could just eat until it wasn't good enough, she'd still find something for you to do or eat. Even if it were candy, she wanted you to eat. I should mention this as it pertains to the story. Alec and I both had to work. We left at the same time, which was very early in the morning. Alec was working for a factory a ways from our home. I was opening crew leader at a restaurant, so with each leaving early, no food was cooked, and we just got ready, fed the dog, and went out the door. Me one way, he another. After work, I headed home. When I got there, I could hear Specs whining for me in a hurry, and opened the door so that she could greet me. But she wasn't the only thing that greeted me. I'd now like to say I totally saw a ghost, but sadly, I still don't know if one was there. For what greeted me was the smell of pancakes, and as I mentioned, neither of us had cooked. I just knew it was Grandma saying hello, in a way that I would forget when Alex got home, and told him what had happened, and he wholeheartedly agreed that it was my grandma. Years flew by, as life does, with work, the birth of our sons, another dog, a cat, rabbit, birds, and multiple fish later. One day, Alex and I were talking, and he tells me he smelled his grandmother's powder. I smell it too, but there's not a ghost in sight. Then one night something strange happens. You must understand that our cat and dog do tolerate each other, but on this night, the other was left out all night. They were both up on our bed, sitting real pretty, both of them, almost side by side. I was sitting on the bed with my back against the headboard, doing something, not sure what, but I finally noticed the cat and the dog were doing strange enough things by sitting near each other, but both stared at the same corner of the room. I look thinking they'd spotted a bug, but I didn't see anything, and go back to whatever. I look again, figuring I must have missed the bug the first time, but there's still no bug, and then it hits me what's going on. They must have seen a ghost. I can't tell you how long they sat there and stared at the corner, neither one moving an inch, but it was quite a while. That's also about the time another thing started. I think I'm the only one this happened to. I know you'll think I'm crazy as well. I started hearing disembodied voices, but you could hear them faintly. And I could never make out what they were saying anyway. This only happened at night. I heard those voices until I moved out of that house and Alec and I got a divorce, since I never heard them again. It was the house, and even the boys said that there was a ghost in the kitchen. This story is my cousin's. She has shared these experiences with me since we were teenagers, and the fact that they take place in her parents' house, the house that she grew up. Apparently, before my aunt and uncle bought the home, it was owned by a family who were in a religious cult of some kind. They had to renovate the place just to make it habitable, and the home is on the south shore of Long Island, New York. My cousin had to share an upstairs bedroom with her little sister while they were growing up. She used to wake up suddenly in the middle of the night and see a dark figure standing between her bed and her sister's. She described this thing as apparently to be dressed in a black hooded cloak, and having a bone-white face with empty black sockets where the eyes should be. The nose was inhumanly long and pointed, giving it the look of one of those doctor masks that they wore during the Black Plague, if you know what I'm talking about. The mouth was also a gaping black hole. She could see hands sticking out of the sleeves of its cloak, and they were white and skeletal. Her impressions of this was that it was the Grim Reaper, except it didn't carry a scythe. It would just appear, lit up by the nearby windows, and stare at her for a few seconds, and then get up if she looked away and back, and it would be gone. Of course, when she was little, she would get up and run and scream into her parents' room. She swears she wasn't just having nightmares, because it was always the same, and she always got up and ran out the room as soon as she realized what she was looking at. Her sister somehow never woke up to this and never saw the entity. She says she saw the thing about a dozen times while growing up in the house, and it never moved or tried to approach her, except for one time when it raised its bony hand and pointed right at her. Eventually, she left home, went to college, and then wound up living and working in Queens. Her older brother, a police officer at one point, moved back home with their parents for a short while. He confided to her that one night, he was alone in the house and staying in an upstairs bedroom when he heard a loud commotion coming from the parents' bedroom downstairs. It sounded like drawers being opened and slammed and shut repeatedly and violently. Being a cop, his first thought was an intruder was looking to rob the house. He pulled his pistol and headed downstairs to investigate. A sweep of his parents' bedroom, the living room, kitchen, and patio turned up empty. But still nervous, and not convinced that he hadn't just interrupted a robbery, he went back upstairs. Only seconds later did the banging and slamming start up again. Seriously freaked out now, it took him several minutes to venture back downstairs. But once more, there was no evidence of a human intruder found. The drawers were open, but nothing was disturbed and out of place. The final event took place earlier this year. My cousin, who is now in her 30s, had moved back into her parents' house with her husband and 2 children, after living abroad for 10 years. Late one night, her young daughter woke up the house screaming bloody murder when her father rushed into the room to see what was wrong. The little girl said she had seen a long white shape gliding across her room. She was staying in the same room as my cousin, the one that she had slept in when she was a little girl. Shortly after putting their daughter back to bed, telling her it was only a dream, my cousin and her husband heard their son begin to shriek from the downstairs spare bedroom. Being a 2-year-old kid, he couldn't articulate his fear. He just continued to scream inconsolably for hours and wouldn't settle down until allowed to sleep with his parents. Neither child had ever had an episode like this before. My cousin and her family are still staying in that house and still sometimes hear weird thumps and bangs around the place at night. No one ever hears the mysterious noise except for at night, and only when they're alone. The other story happened to my brother while he was on active duty in the army and stationed in Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. He was an enlisted military police officer and happened to be on base patrol one night with his partner when their sergeant radioed them and told them they needed to come over to a condemned housing area. Their assignment this night was to drive through the base housing and make sure that no shady activities were taking place. Now, unfortunately, even on military bases, One has to deal with drug addicts roaming around, and sometimes people tend to squat in old abandoned housing areas. This particular neighborhood was full of condemned houses with no electricity, due to be torn down soon. The sergeant said that someone had called to report seeing people in one of the houses, and they would probably need to go in and remove some addicts. That's what they were expecting anyway. My brother and his partner went into the house while their patrol sergeant stayed outside to cover the perimeter in case anyone tried to sneak out the building. First, they did a sweep of the ground floor to include the kitchen, dining room, bathroom, living room, and a pantry. Nothing to be found. But as they were combing each area with flashlights, they heard muffled footsteps coming from the second story. Aha, my brother thought. There's only one staircase, so they can't get out unless they jump out the window. His partner covered the stairs while he swept the second story, which was a long hallway lined with bedrooms and one bathroom. None of the rooms turned up any signs of a person, but they were sure they'd heard footsteps, so this time they both headed upstairs. They not only searched each room, but opened every closet and the bathroom too. Still nothing. Figuring they'd been hearing things, they both headed downstairs to give the house's ground floor one last do-over before heading outside. Meanwhile, their patrol sergeant is walking around outside and can see their flashlights moving through the house. He can also see all the windows. My brother and his fellow soldiers go out to report that they haven't found anything, and perhaps whoever made the call was mistaken. The sergeant is agitated and informs them that as they were covering the ground floor, he saw two human shadows pass by an upstairs window. They must have missed the intruders who were probably still in there. My brother and his battle buddy insist they covered both floors and found no one. But the sergeant isn't convinced and sends them back in to investigate. So the first place they head to now is upstairs. They're searching the first bedroom when they heard footsteps pounding down the hallway, and a door slammed shut at the far end of the hall. They run out of the room and shine their flashlights but see no one. They check every window and every crevice. No one. They think there might be a draft, but it's all closed tight. So they continue checking every room and closet until they get the bright idea to open the attic door. That is one of the bedrooms. That one down at the end of the hallway where the door was slammed shut. My brother's partner has to stand on his shoulders to pull the attic door open because it is in the ceiling. He pulls it open, shines his light around, and there's nothing. For good measure, he pulls out his pepper spray and just crops dust before going back down. Nothing that breathes oxygen could have sucked in all that spray and not made tons of noise. And there's still nothing. At that moment, they both heard a door slam shut on the other end of the hallway. They run down and open the room, but it's empty, and so is the closet. Rather than run up and down the hall at night, not exactly sure what to think, they decide to head back downstairs for good measure. They do one more sweep of the ground floor before heading outside to tell the sergeant no luck. And did he see anyone exiting the house? He replied no. He'd been doing laps around the perimeter and no one had left the property. What's more, he demanded to know how they hadn't been able to catch anyone since he'd been watching them outside the front door. Two shadows had gone, running by the second-story windows. My brother called me at 3 a.m. just to tell me this right after it happened, voice trembling. I believe that he's sincere. He has never given any thought to being paranoid before, but he's been a believer since then. Ever since I can remember, I have always had a love for the paranormal. I was raised in a household that believed in spirits,
even though we are Christian. My mother even claimed to have precognition. She would get bad feelings and images of things that would happen. She was almost never wrong. I've strayed here a bit, but I've wanted to provide some insight. I was never taught to be afraid. I have never thought it was real, to be completely honest. That was until my grandmother died. She wasn't just some old lady that we visited begrudgingly. She was my best friend, a mentor, someone that understood. You could go to her with the worst thing you had ever done, and you would leave at peace and with love in your heart. And of course, since she was a wonderful person, she had cancer. Soft tissue cancer. So rare, it took doctors years to diagnose it. It put her through hell. She went through the whole 9 yards. Chemo, radiation, experimental medicine. However, it did nothing to slow the tumors from growing. Finally, she decided to opt for quality over quantity. I lived with her for 2 years and took care of her. It would never amount to all she did for me, but it was something I could do for this angel of a person. I watched the cancer change her from a high-spirited, sharp-witted woman to a bedridden shell of a person. She was in so much pain, she was losing her mind. Dementia ran in her family, and she was showing the signs. Every other conversation was how she was ready to die, ready to see her husband, my grandfather, again. We would watch ghost shows together, daydream about contacting the dead, and she told me that when she died, she would come back and send me signs. The time came, and she got her wish. She died that fall. I was devastated. I was desperately searching for the signs that she had promised, but I got nothing. I was so lost and hurt. I didn't know what to do. I'd lay in bed at night and talk into the darkness of my room. I would obsess over the paranormal. Even downloaded Ouija boards on my phone. I would do EVP sessions. Still, I got nothing. I resigned myself to the thought that there was no life after death. God was a lie. There was no point to it all. It took years to heal. Who knows? Maybe I am still damaged. I only started noticing strange things 2 years after she died. I moved away to a different state. I needed a change. The new place was not isolated or old. It had only 3 previous tenants, all alive and well, as I checked. It started with odd feelings, like someone was there. Voices down the hall in my kid's room. A water bottle was actually thrown across the dining room. I came up with a logical reason for it all. The walls were thin. The bottle could have been sitting on something unbalanced, until one night I was sitting on the couch. It was late. Everyone was asleep. I felt like someone was staring at me, glaring even, like they were standing in the hallway, ready to run at me. There was a cold in the air that sank into my chest. I was absolutely terrified. I did not understand why. It lasted for what seemed like hours, but was actually only a few minutes. I went straight to bed. A few weeks later, we moved to a different city to an apartment. It was from the 80s and not very well kept up. The owner lost it in a card game, we were told, from the other tenants. So, when I heard odd noises, I thought nothing of it. I would feel like someone walked into a room, only to look up and see no one. I sat on the couch in the living room and saw the recliner just start moving. No one even close to it. No pets to brush up against it. There would be small pops and cracks like someone dropping something metal. I would never go to investigate. It was like it wanted to be known. The more I ignored it, the worse it got. In the middle of watching a movie, I felt the couch sink ever so slightly. Then a tingly cold feeling slowly moved over my hand, up to my arm. On everything I own, it felt like a hand brushing up my arm. It felt lonely. It had a strange feeling, like it was just a person longing for human interaction. I said out loud, "I know you're here. As long as you leave me and my kids alone, I'm okay with you being here." Something in here told me that it understood. I cannot explain how or why. I just felt it in my heart. The activity had almost completely stopped after that. It was months until I actually saw it. I was lying on the couch looking at my phone when all of a sudden I felt it there. I looked up, and to the left I saw a white shadowy figure in the shape of a person. It walked from my left to the right in an odd way, like it was taking large steps. I jumped up and ran out of the apartment. Before you start to think about it just being my eyes staring at my phone, the shape was not rectangular like my phone. It was higher up than I was holding my phone. It was humanoid shape. It took hours and a lot of cigarettes to work up the courage to return inside. I closed the door behind me and spoke to it again. "You have to leave now. You aren't welcome here anymore. I don't want you here." I was so scared I just wanted it to leave. Whoever and whatever it was, I didn't care anymore. It made my anxiety so much worse. It seemed to work, and a year later we moved again. This apartment was warm and homely. I felt good there. It had the aura of a welcoming home. It was a year before I felt anything, but God help me it did. It happened again. It started with strange feelings like someone was there staring at me. Drawers opening by themselves, cold spots in old places. My dog would bark at random places in the apartment. It was only once, but she even growled and barked. She is an English bulldog and very sweet and quiet, like her breed usually is. It was the first and only time she growled. I feel like I'm either being followed by the same spirit, or I am attracting them somehow. I have theorized maybe my constant videos and movies and TV shows about ghosts and demons may have opened the communications. Maybe I have invited them. It is scary and exciting at the same time. I want to know more, but I'm afraid of the consequences.
"5 years ago, I was a little Mormon missionary serving in Nebraska. My companion and I were at church one Sunday, and it was a typical Sunday. Said hi to all the families we saw in the halls and foyer, and there was one 13-year-old girl in the ward named Mary. She was one who always had some sort of snack made up for each of us that week that she gave to us at church. Normally she was always so nice and polite, and always took any opportunity to greet us. She was walking towards us in the hall that morning, and I noticed that she was super pale and had this wide-eyed look, and was just staring straight ahead without blinking. As we were walking by, I said, "Hey Mary, how are you today?" I got no response. She didn't even look at us. Red flags went up, because she would never do something like that. After church, I told my companion that I wanted to talk to Mary's mum to see if everything was okay. When I found her, I could tell that she was uneasy and just looked worried. I asked her, and she immediately began crying. We told her that we would stop by their house immediately after church and see if we could talk with Mary and her family. When we got to her house, I had a kind of eerie feeling. I asked my companion if he felt the same, and he agreed. Mary's mum answered the door and sat us down in the living room. We asked her if everything was all right with Mary. She was at a loss for words for a moment, and just told us that she didn't know. She said the past week Mary acted mad and disgusted towards her family. Mind you, this is one of the closest families I've ever seen. She said that Mary randomly attacked her older brother earlier in the week. Nothing too serious, she just started punching and kicking him. Her mum couldn't understand the sudden change in her attitude. We asked if we could talk to Mary to see if we could get anything out of her. From the couch we were sitting on, we could see down the hallway where the bedrooms were. As soon as I saw Mary come out of her room, and as she started walking down the hallway, I immediately had a feeling that I can't quite fully describe. It was the worst feeling I've ever felt. I can honestly say that the one word to describe it would be evil. Mary had the same wide-eyed look that she had at church. She sat down in a chair in front of us and just stared at the wall in front of her. I asked her if everything was all right. She didn't answer. I asked her if she was angry at her family and why she had attacked her brothers. She finally stopped staring at the wall and looked at me. That awful feeling I had got worse when she looked at me, and she said that she was told to hurt him. I asked her, who told her? And she said the voices told her to hurt her family and leave. I asked her if she knew where the voices were coming from, and she didn't answer. I asked her mother if I could give her a blessing. She immediately said yes. When we gave her a blessing, she didn't resist at all. She just sat there. After we gave her the blessing, the mood immediately changed. She was no longer wide-eyed, with a glazed look about her. Her colour was starting to come back, and she was breathing heavily. That awful evil feeling that I had gone away. As male missionaries, we aren't allowed to hug females, but after a few minutes had gone by, Mary gave me a very big hug, and I wasn't about to fight it or deny it. When we left their house and got into our car, my companion and I just both sat there for a few minutes, thinking about what the hell had just happened. He finally broke the silence and said, "I don't like the feeling I had back there." I told him I had the same feeling. We checked up on her next Sunday at church, and she was back to being the happy-go-lucky Mary that everyone knew. We asked her mum how everything was back at home, and she said it was like nothing had happened. A few weeks later, I asked Mary if she remembered anything about it. She said that she could only vaguely remember attacking her brother and not knowing why, and that after that we gave her a blessing. It was like she'd woken up from a dream. Being a religious person, you hear stories about demons and possessions in the scriptures and in stories, and there are countless movies about them. But I never gave it a real second thought. I don't know exactly what happened with Mary, whether she was actually possessed or it be something else. She didn't crawl up a wall. Her head didn't spin around, and she didn't speak in a different language. All I have to go on is this feeling. The feeling I had when she walked into the room, with her glazed look, pale skin, and her answer about the voices. I will never forget that story, or the feeling I had. I hope to never feel it again, and it scared the hell out of me. Sorry to get all religious. When I was a kid, this happened. I was very awake, and nothing like it has ever happened since. People's general reactions tend to be that I must have had a night terror. But that simply is not the case. My brother had many experiences that confirmed to me that what I saw was real. I had just woken up from a dream, which I also remember very well. I was flying a plane through caves with Elmo. That's relevant, because I woke up, and at the time my brother and I were sharing a room. On one wall I had my twin bed, which was the top bunk of a bunk bed we had separated. Diagonally across from me, my brother's bed was the top bunk, and it stood several feet off the ground, perhaps 5. He used one of those plastic Fisher-Price play sets to get up to it. Anyway, when I woke up I was immediately aware of a nun dressed in a dark red version of what you would expect a nun to wear. I think it's called a habit. She was on her knees right next to my bed just looking at me. I, of course, was very scared, but I could speak and move, and I even asked her where my mum was. I became really afraid when she was just looking at me. It wasn't a malevolent look. It was just eerie that she didn't react to my question. But what I next saw filled me with the type of horror that gives me chills just even thinking about it. On the slide set that led up to my brother's bed was an entirely black entity. It almost resembled a dementor, but it wasn't floating nor moving, just standing looking down at my brother as he slept. As soon as I became aware of this thing, I was entirely consumed with dread. I remember being so terrified that I ducked under the covers until I actually made it to the morning. Some interesting things happened after this. First of all, whether this was a trick of the mind or not, I can't even say. But the next day at school was library day. The first thing I did was to get a non-fiction book on ghosts, and the first page I opened was to an artist's rendition of a nun, who I swear was identical to the one I had just seen. I mean, come on. But the scary part is that my brother had multiple experiences, which he complained about several years down the road. I doubt he even remembered my story, but at the time, he really started to get bad. Nightmares, night terrors, and seeing things in his room. He was in middle school, and it really started to take a toll on him in a lot of ways. I was in my junior year of high school when he finally told me what he had been seeing, as our relationship had been a little bit disconnected growing up, but we are extremely close now for those of you who are concerned. He told me that he had been haunted, or at the very least had several experiences with an all-black entity that he described as entirely malevolent and horrifyingly evil. The chills I got then, I have them just now while recounting this. The kind of energy this thing had was so real, and it made me believe in manifestations beyond the realm of our normal consciousness. There's a lot of backstory with my brother actually. He's always been attuned to things beyond normal perception. But this is the only thing that I have experienced too. He has also seen the nun I saw, and he says that she's always passive in the few encounters he has had with her. I have had a number of paranormal experiences. When I was 14, my brother left for college, and I moved into his old room. Some spooky stuff happened there. For the record, it was just me and my parents. We lived in a small town, and my friends all lived in a larger neighbouring town, so no one ever came over. Anywho, as my brother left for college, I entered high school. Most of this stuff happened during my freshman year of high school. September. After moving into the room, a skull is drawn on the dust on the window pane, near where my head rests when I sleep. It was a pretty well-drawn skull. It was on the indoor side of the window, so someone had needed to enter my room to do it. It freaks me out, and I wipe it away. Several days later, it's night. I'm studying on my bed. The lights in the room make the windows look like mirrors, as such happens at night. I look up from my textbook towards the skull window and see a white silhouette standing behind me. Shocked, I hold my gaze for 10 seconds, turn my head around to see it directly, but it's not there. I turn to the window, and it's no longer in the reflection, and I don't sleep there that night. A few weeks pass. It's 11:09 p.m, and I'm waiting for Loveline to come on the radio. My lights are off. I'm facing the same window, and a smaller, white silhouette strides past the window right in front of me, but outside. I leave and don't sleep there for several nights. After that occurrence, I start seeing more things drawn on the windows, mostly geometric shapes. I vaguely remember a triangle thing which gave me the creeps, but one thing I really remember, I even got a sticky note with "draw below this" on it and stuck it on a window. Within a few days, I found a light, perfectly drawn circle beneath the note. During all of high school, I was pretty terrified of that entire portion of the house. I would avoid it as much as possible, and I'd occasionally see dark figures out of the corner of my eye, but apparently that's a normal thing for people, so I won't put too much authority into that. Even as a child, I remember seeing colourful orbs buzzing around, though I didn't know what to think about them. But one night, during my junior year of high school, I went over to my washer/dryer, which is directly down the hall from the spooky bedroom. At that point, I'd just chosen to stop sleeping there. I look down the hall, get the normal feeling of dread, and turn my back to the hall, and bend over to empty the washing machine. I instantly lose control of my body, release my basket, stand straight up, and hear a masculine voice exhale and hiss in my ear. I regain control of my body and run the hell out of there. I also have a couple of weird family-relating things, both related to my late great-aunt. In the summer between my sophomore-junior year, my father had been having heart problems, as he had done over the past decade. My brother and I were visiting him at the hospital. My brother will bring him home tomorrow morning, and he's going to have surgery in a month. At some point, the image of my late great-aunt pops into my mind. Something seems very significant about it. Roughly 24 hours later, I'm home with my dad, and tasked with waking him up from his nap. He's blue and cold. He never wakes up. A year or two later, it's Friday night. I'm in the recliner chair where my father passed away. My mother and I are watching TV, and I smell perfume for about a minute. Is it my mother's? No, she says. The smell dies down but picks up a few minutes later. I checked the scented candles on the fireplace, but they aren't lit and didn't smell like anything regarding this perfume. Suddenly I realize it's the same perfume that my late great-aunt wore. 2 nights later, my grandfather refuses to eat, and he dies Thursday 6 days after the phantom perfume. This happened the other day. My family is moving into a new house, so we're still getting used to the sounds of the house settling. I'm also usually at college, so I'm not sure about my parents' or sister's schedules. Last Monday, I was cutting up some sticks piled against the side of the garage. There was a door that went into the garage about 10 feet from me. I hadn't used that door to go outside. I just used the main garage door. At one point I looked up from the sticks and saw that the door was open to about 60 degrees.
Then it started to close, slowly at first, but picking up speed until it slammed closed. Now it was a pretty windy day, so I figured there were two possibilities. The wind opened the door, or someone had been in the garage and opened the door to look at me. I was worried that it was the latter, and they wanted to steal some stuff, as there were still a lot of boxes in the garage. So I picked up the hatchet, strut my way in, and see not a single thing out of place. I opened the door into the house properly, and my dog looks at me, like you'd expect a dog to see a madman with a hatchet at the ready. Nothing seems to be wrong there, so I figure it must have been the wind that opened the door. Of course I had to be sure, so I go to open it myself. I have to climb over a few piles of boxes, but it's not too hard to reach. The big problem is evident the moment I touch the door. This door is a solid-ass door. It's definitely locked to a point that I can't turn the knob a single centimeter. But then again, neither can wind, so I just give it a good tug. It doesn't budge. I lean back with my full weight, pull the door, and it doesn't give a damn. I unlock the doorknob and try to open it without turning the knob, but it's the same. Only when I unlock the door and turn the knob so that I can open it. Once I finally get the door to start opening, I realize why seeing the door open was so weird. No one had opened the door in the months that we had been living here. As I opened it, paint cracked and chips fell off the hinges, and it creaked, and some of the crappy paneling on the door started to peel back. When I let go of the door, it swung closed pretty quickly, so at least that part was natural, but I still have no idea how that damn door opened itself in the first place. I know it's impossible, but I saw the door, and I know what I saw.
When we were younger, about 13 or so, me and 3 friends were just goofing off after school as usual, riding our bikes and just doing what young teens do. We eventually rode past the old abandoned house that's local for us, which has basically been there since we can remember. My friend's parents, who were here since the 70s, can remember that house being abandoned since there also. Anyhow, we rode past it as usual, and decided to go a bit closer because we always were curious. As we approached it, we saw someone peeking through the curtains. As curious teenagers, we naturally go to inspect. As we got closer, the curtains kind of drew back and the figure disappeared. Stumped, we decided to approach the veranda, and that's when we heard a baby crying. The crying slowly progressed into wailing, and eventually one friend had enough and knocked to see if anyone was home. After 5 minutes of continued knocking and wailing, the door finally opened. It was a little lady who looked to be about 40 or so. My friend asked if everything was okay, and if the baby was fine, and the lady simply told us to go away. My friend continued to ask if she needed help, or if everything was alright, and she continued with her reply of, "Go away." This continued for about a minute, until she shut the door on us, and the wailing became louder still. At this point, everyone wanted to run, but my friend decided to knock again in fear the child was being neglected. Eventually, after a few knocks, the door just kind of opened. Not scary creaking open, but rather it was left unlocked. We, as dumb teenagers, walked in to see if everything was okay, and partially due to curiosity. As all 4 of us walked in, the crying stopped, and we stood in this abandoned house covered in dust, and everything was like it hadn't been inhabited in decades.
We took a few steps forward and the crying began again. By this point, we decided we needed to find the child, so me and a friend went upstairs while the other two investigated downstairs. As we climbed the stairs, the crying got louder and louder, and we continued to search each room slowly. Eventually, we reached the last room, and it was apparently where the cot was, so we opened the door to investigate. The first thing we both noticed was nothing except for a baby carriage in the far left corner near the window. The crying was coming from there. It was as clear as day. We made our way to it, peeked over to find nothing. But the crying was still there. From this empty carriage. My head started spinning. I don't know what to feel. I called out for my friends downstairs, and they ran upstairs and saw, or rather, didn't see, what we couldn't see. They filled us in onto what they saw downstairs, which was the woman walking into the kitchen downstairs. They followed her, and she vanished. We all knew this whole situation was messy, and we ran as quickly as we could to the front door. We got onto our bikes, looked back, to see the door being closed slowly by someone and then locked. A few moments later, the curtains were pulled back by a woman holding a child, smiling. We rode hard and fast back home and didn't turn back, and didn't sleep much for a few days. A few years after, the house got demolished, but people began seeing a woman holding a baby at the local parks and bridge. That is, when you didn't see the kid who drowned in the sewers nearby. I hated that area, and I was so glad when I moved. Sometimes I drive past it at night, and I just get the worst feeling ever. It's always too quiet, and still scares me 11 years later. I'd never lived in the best areas. My parents never had much money, and I was a single child, but we grew up fine. There was one place we lived in that I affectionately called Roman Hill, as it was very close to an old Roman fort, and as it was high on the hill, me and my friends just called it so. So, one day, I'm getting back home from school. I arrive a lot earlier than my parents do, so it would be customary for me to open the door, let myself in, and start cooking myself some pasta or something while watching cartoons. The usual day. Today was probably going to be like every other day, or so I thought. I got to the apartment building and used the key to open the main door. I checked the mail and started walking through, preparing to go up the stairs, as our building wasn't fancy enough to have an elevator. I had to ascend 6 flights of stairs as we lived on the 3rd floor. On my way up, as normal, do I go past the 1st floor doors. One of these doors houses a small, scraggly, strange woman. She's the kind of lady that you'd see with pot in hand asking for money on the side of a road, or perhaps saying about the end of the world. She was a little nutty, to say the least. She always told me that good things were going to happen to me and gave me a smile and called me dearie. But to other people, she could be a right old loon. As I was ascending the stairs, do I hear her door start to open just as I'm approaching it. So I make sure to look behind me and wish her a good day as I make my way up. She rattles out of her door, closes and locks it, and I wish her a good day and offer her a friendly smile. This time she doesn't even acknowledge me. She just walks out of her house and goes down the stairs. I know that she's a bit off, so I ignore it, don't dwell on it too often, and go up the stairs. My routine is like any other day, and I don't think about this for a while. Perhaps 3 months later,
The same thing happens again. I'm coming home from school, but this time she's on the stairs, coming down them very slowly, with this vacant look on her face. I say hello to her, but she completely ignores me. I haven't seen her since the last incident, and wonder if perhaps she's getting to the end of her life, with her not responding and all. But simply carry on with my day and forget about it. Not 2 days later though, coming back from school, it being Friday and me being overjoyed for the weekend, do me and two of my friends, as they were sleeping over, notice a moving van in the car park. We go over and snoop around to see who's moving in. It's a young couple with a small child. Being teenage girls, we start a conversation and dote on their adorable little boy. The mother tells us that they're moving into an apartment on the first floor, and that it would be great to see us sometime, and asked if I'd ever looked after children before. We get into this whole conversation about babysitting, and basically I say that I'd be happy to do a trial run with them in future. I let them know the house I live at and to give me a knock if they ever need my services. I walk up the stairs feeling very giddy, and my friends are telling me how lucky I am that I'll be able to look after that cute little baby boy and potentially earn some pocket money, which to a 15-year-old girl is a triple win. I get upstairs, me and my friends hang out, and that's when my mum arrives home a few hours later. I tell her about my day, and me and my friends excitedly tell her of the possibility of work, about the people moving in. She tells me that that's absolutely fantastic, but then makes an offhand comment about how sad it was that our neighbour passed away. I ask her which neighbour, and she tells me it was the lady who not 2 days ago didn't say anything to me. I ask her, when was this? She told me the following. The lady who had been living there had been a friend of the man who owned the block. However, she had not paid rent in several months, hadn't answered any of her post, and the stack of mail was just growing bigger and bigger, to the point it would no longer fit in her post box. So, the on-site manager got in contact with the police. He opened the door up for them, and they went inside. They found the decayed body of the neighbour. She had been dead for nearly 4 months, they estimated. They had to completely gut the apartment, and when it was fully finished, was it ready for new people to move in, i.e., the people who I'd met downstairs. I gave her a scoff and told her that it was absolute nonsense, as not only had I seen her 3 months ago, but that I saw her 2 days ago going down the stairs. I said this with such confidence, with almost a mocking tone in my voice, trying to bravado myself to impress my friends. But my mother gave me a concerned look. Honestly, darling, she's been dead for quite a while. I'm surprised you didn't smell it when you went downstairs when they were gutting the place. The thing is, I don't remember them gutting the place at all. Surely I would have seen it. Am I right? The family moved in, and they were nice. I never saw the lady again, whether it was her ghost or something else. But I'm glad, and I hope that whatever realm or plane she's in now, she's in a better and more comfortable place. If you grow up in England, there's a story that you might hear. One of the old legends that's all but died out in our modern era. It isn't popular anymore, but the tale of the Church Grim still gets whispered around the fires at night and told in hushed tones to curious children. While it isn't as bloody or monstrous as some stories, its power comes from how real it is.
The church grim is a spirit that oversees the welfare of the church where it was buried, and it helps protect the churchyard from vandals and robbers. Whenever a new graveyard was buried, it was believed that the first person buried there had to spend eternity guarding the other souls from evil. So in order to prevent a human from shouldering this burden, a stray black dog was sacrificed. The Grim was also said to ring church bells the night before a villager died, and they're associated with bringing bad luck to whoever spots one. They often appear as black dogs with red eyes, but other animals such as pigs and lambs have also been used as guardians of the church. There are countless records of people encountering this type of spirit, and even some of the most devout, honest churchgoers have sworn they have seen it. When I was 8, my grandma told me all of this, which had been passed down from her family, who came to the United States from Tewkesbury, England. I'm now ashamed to admit it, but back then I didn't believe her. I called her a liar and told her the ghosts aren't real. I remember how sad she looked at me. I wish I had trusted her words, but I guess I had to learn my lesson the hard way. One night, not long after I turned 17, I was coming back from my boyfriend Max's house. A thick blanket of dark clouds had gathered that night, and I was hurrying so that I wouldn't get caught in the storm. Mist had started to creep across the ground, and I was trying to not trip when I heard a whimper. The noise was most definitely coming from inside the graveyard, which nearly made me decide not to go in. There had been a string of people finished in this area lately by some unknown assailant, and since I didn't have any form of protection on me, I didn't want to get caught alone and meet their sticky end as well. Then the sound came again, and my heart twisted. I couldn't just ignore an animal that was in trouble, so I took a nervous breath and pushed open the wrought iron gate. I cringed as the hinges squeaked, but I resolutely continued forward. I called quietly to the dog as I weaved among the headstones, but in the gathering mist, my foam flashlight wasn't doing me much good. I thought I saw its eyes glinting once, but it was just the jeweled eyes of a doll leaning up against a headstone. I was about to abandon my search, especially since my thin sneakers were beginning to soak through, when I saw a little black puppy. It was curled up next to an unmarked gravestone in the furthest corner of the graveyard, and even 10 feet away from it I could see it shivering. I called out to it and smiled as it perked its ears towards me. "Hey little pup, come here." My voice carried the excited tone that most dogs love, but the puppy ignored me. I moved in closer, and when it didn't try to run away, I gently scooped it up. It let out another whimper, and I began checking it over since it sounded like it could be hurt. As I was examining it, I noticed that it was wearing a raggedy old collar with a tag, and apparently his name was Kirk. He seemed fine, and he had even given me a friendly, tentative lick. "Hey Kirk, it's okay boy. I'm gonna bring you home with me, then tomorrow I'll figure out where you live and get you home." He gave me a happy little woof, and I could almost believe that he understood me. I was about to turn around and head for the gate, when Kirk jumped out of my arms, his hackles raised. I didn't see anything, but I heard the hushed sounds of voices. I quickly shut off my light, scuttling quietly over to a larger gravestone to try and hide myself. I paused carefully, not to make a sound, as I panicked as the voices became clearer. "Are you sure she's there?" "Yeah, definitely. Saw her light over that way." "When we catch her,
Gonna make sure she can't sit for a week. Then we cut her throat. Slice her up just like the others. I had heard enough. I needed to get out of there. And I frantically tried to get Kirk's attention. He wouldn't turn his head though, and his hackles were slowly rising. I was starting to shake, but before I could move to pick him up, his eyes began glowing. I halted, my hand outstretched towards him, and I blinked rapidly. At first I thought I was imagining things, or that the two men had some sort of red light that I was seeing. But I quickly ruled out those possibilities. Kirk's eyes were glowing a ruby red in the darkness, and no amount of blinking was making it change. "Kirk?" My voice sounded tiny, and for a moment, I had regressed to my 5-year-old self, when I believed there was a monster under my bed. I hadn't believed in the paranormal for 12 years, so this was kicking me pretty far out of my comfort zone. I was still down on my knees, my hands outstretched, when Kirk began growling. I could see him as well, but I watched as the level of his eyes began to rise, and he let out a bone-chilling howl, and I could hear the anger and sadness woven into it. As the last note faded into the mist, I heard one of the men let out a surprised shout as Kirk bounded towards them. I quickly lost sight of him, but I could hear the anguished screams and the sounds of tearing flesh coming from the men. One of them shot a gun, but either they missed or it had no effect on Kirk. About 5 minutes ticked by, each one feeling slower than the last, before I heard Kirk coming back to me. I turned my flashlight on instantly, regretting my decision. Kirk had returned to his puppy form, but he was dragging an arm with him like it was a stick. He dropped the macabre gift at my feet, crouching down and waggling his little tail playfully. I half laughed and half sobbed, and before I could think, I picked him up and hugged him. I realized I wasn't afraid of him at all, and my grandma's words about not judging a book by its cover crossed my mind. "Thank you, good boy. Thank you so much." He licked the tears that were streaming down my cheeks until I stopped crying, and he nudged his head against mine with a happy woof. I sat him back down, then pulled myself unsteadily to my feet with the help of the headstone. I was still trembling, but I was able to step carefully over the arm and get myself past the bodies without vomiting. Kirk followed me, weaving playfully around my ankles like he was herding a sheep. When I reached the gate, he stopped, whining sadly as I passed through the wrought iron. I looked back at him and wondered what would happen if he passed through. Could he even do it? I realized Kirk wasn't a typical dog, but this didn't stop me from wanting to take care of him. I figured it was worth a shot, and in the worst case scenario, he would remain trapped here. I squatted down, clapping my hands together excitedly to call me to him. "Kirk, come here, boy, come on." He ran towards me, wagging his tail. Just as he hit the line of the gate, he crumpled, and it looked like he had slammed head first into an invisible wall. I felt my heart wrench painfully, and I wanted him to be able to leave his phantasmal prison. I walked over to him, picking him up and gently cradling him in my chest. He felt so solid and so alive, and even knowing what he was, I couldn't bring myself to abandon my little hero. His loneliness was palatable when I first saw him, and I didn't want him stuck like this. I carried him to the gate, stopping just shy of the threshold, and I had no idea what to do. But a memory came floating back to me. My grandpa had been a preacher, and I recalled how he said during one of his sermons that sometimes spirits just need someone to tell them it was okay to be free. I knew that I was risking the chance that Kirk could simply disappear, but I wanted him to be free. I took a breath. Kirk, I release you from your spirit guardian duties. You are free to travel wherever you want. My voice had gained confidence as I spoke, and by the end I was sweeping an arm out in a hand gesture, as though I could make the gate allow Kirk to pass through by sheer force of will. He had held practically still this whole time, and he hadn't even tried to squirm around or jump down like a normal puppy. I looked down at his furry little face, closed my eyes, and took a step forward. When I opened them, I was on the other side of the gate, but my arms were empty. I spun around, but Kirk wasn't on the other side. I called to him and checked inside the graveyard but couldn't find him. My shoulders drooped as I let out a defeated sigh and began walking home. My soaked sneakers making a sad squish sound as I made my way through 1.5 miles of near darkness. My phone had died at some point, but I knew the route well enough that I could still navigate it just fine. I finally caught sight of my apartment stop, and sitting on the topmost step was a little black puppy. It was Kirk. I ran up to him, and he barked excitedly. As I went to reach for him, he jumped, landing in my arms in an ungraceful wiggling ball of fur. That night was now 4 years ago, and every once in a while Kirk gives me a special bark to let me know that he has to go and take care of some business. My daughter Celia loves him, and he likes to watch over her as she learns to walk. Max and I have a bit of an odd family, but we wouldn't change it for the world.
I want to clarify that I am an atheist, so I don't typically believe in anything supernatural. I'm not suggesting that this event was paranormal, but it was, and is, something that I didn't and still don't understand. I was completely sober and of sound mind when this happened. My boyfriend and I were planning on riding around and smoking and drinking later, as I was young and dumb. But at that point, we had not done anything to alter our minds, and I was not having any mental problems that could have caused this. My boyfriend and I did not live together at the time, and I wanted to go home for a bit to take a shower before we were planning on hanging out again. My boyfriend dropped me off at my house and left to go back to his, promising to come back in an hour to pick me back up. I was alone in my room, and I was the only person in the house. The rest of my family was gone for several days, so I knew it wasn't anyone playing tricks on me. Let me quickly explain the setting of my room. My room was really like 2 rooms in one, meaning that both rooms were connected to each other. In the first room that you come into, as soon as you open the door, there is my bed, dresser, and TV. Then you walk through a small open doorway where the second part of my room is. This is where my closets and bathrooms are. The second part is basically like a sitting area with a bathroom attached. The shower, toilet, and sink are all very open, and you can see the first part of my room from the shower and sink. I took a hot and relaxing shower, and I was in a good mood, as I was looking forward to seeing my boyfriend again. I left the shower and was drying off when, suddenly, clear as day, I heard someone whisper my name. I froze. I looked around the room, checking everywhere, but no one was there. My TV was not on, and there was no music playing or anything obvious that would explain the whisper. But the voice, to add to this, only said my name. The room seemed to get colder, and I got a bad feeling wash over me, like someone was watching. I felt like I needed to leave. I didn't feel like I was in danger, but I was a little shocked and confused, not understanding how I heard my name. The whisper had sounded like it had come from the first part of my room where the bed was. I quickly got dressed and left my room. I checked the whole house, and no one was home. All the TVs were off, so the house was silent. I was so freaked out. I waited the rest of the time outside my driveway until my boyfriend came back to pick me up. I didn't tell him what happened until much later, but when I did, he shared with me that one time when he had stayed the night and I had left early to go to work, he was alone in the house and he had heard his name being whispered in my room. This freaked him out, so he went into the kitchen to get something to drink, and he said he's heard his name again, and after that, he left. No one was there, the TV wasn't on, there was no music playing, and there was no explainable way to explain how he heard that. I believe him, as he's not one to make up things like this. I also want to mention that often in that house when I was alone, I would feel like I was being watched. Other people who have been into the house have also told me the same. I no longer live there and have not had an experience like that since. I truly don't know how to explain what happened.
My family swears up and down that this didn't happen. But I swear to God, I know what I saw. My house is one story, and we only have 2 bathrooms, one down the hall and the other in my parents' room. I hate my parents' room in general. It just gives me a bad feeling overall, and I had my first case of sleep paralysis in that room. For whatever reason, my bathroom shower was broken. So I went into my parents' room to shower. I told them both I was there, so my dad wouldn't have to worry about accidentally walking in on me, and my mother helped run the shower for me. She kissed me goodbye, and I began to undress. After I had my shirt off, bare chest, and all out, I tried to get a Bluetooth speaker to sync with my phone, but it just wasn't having it. In the middle of my struggle, the doorknob started shaking. It was locked, so the only way to move it was from left to right, and it just kept on shaking loudly. I turned around and screamed, "Yeah?" and got no reply. I said it again, but there was still nothing. The doorknob just kept on shaking. Eventually it stopped and went quiet again, and I just ended up taking my shower. But the entire time, I couldn't take my eyes off the door. Now, as an artist/writer, I couldn't help but to imagine scary scenarios that really would just make me pass out. I figured someone cracking open the door, but just enough to look at me before closing it again unannounced. Eventually I was really freaked out, and I cut the shower short. After quickly putting on a towel, I stood in front of the door and thought to myself, I remember leaving the lights on in my parents' room, so if they're off, I'm going to die. Lo and behold, the lights in my parents' room were off, and the switch was next to the door. So I just took a deep breath and booked it across the dark room in nothing but a towel. After I put on a bathrobe, I confronted my mother and asked if she'd turned off the lights. My mum regularly forgets to leave the lights on for anyone else in a room, so it made sense that she did that after my shower. She turned the lights off on her way out, I'd imagine. But when I asked her about the doorknob, she told me instantly to stop lying. Now I'm standing there like, you're kidding me, right? Did you shake the doorknob or what? My mum says no, and that no one did. My dad had been asleep on the couch the entire time, and she hadn't seen my brother come in. Now I'm thinking, okay, it's my little brother, the absolute prick. I like to shake the bathroom doorknob once or twice when he's inside to scare him, so he must have pranked me too. Nope. He was inside his room mid-game tournament with his door locked. After his game, I asked him and he told me it wasn't. He was inside gaming, even raging, so he definitely wasn't in the mood to mess with me. He really didn't. And he's kind of scared of the dark as well, so I doubt he would have walked into the dark room just to shake the doorknob for 2 minutes. My family agree. I imagined it. And even though I have an active imagination, I never actually see anything. My mum in her life has had ghost stories about shaking doorknobs that have no explanation. I'm certain it wasn't my family, and something like the wind couldn't have done it either. Not when all the windows are closed, mind you. Not even a pet was in the room. So what could it have been?
This happened a couple of years ago. Our bedroom is way at the front of the house facing the street, since it used to be the old carport, so it's quite a big space. We have a bookcase against the wall opposite from our bed, and really, rather than holding books, it holds just a bunch of trinkets and such. And my husband has received a tall beer glass from his birthday just recently, which we placed on the top shelf near the back. Now this night, I just put our baby boy into bed in his room, just up the stairs next to ours, after which I went to bed, and my husband and I lay in bed for a good while with the lights off, just talking about all the stuff that's happening during the day. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I hear glass shattering. I'm not kidding. I heard the broken pieces of glass sliding over our tiled floor. We both lay there, contemplating what the hell had just happened. Deciding to investigate, I switched on the lights, got up, and scanned around the room for the broken glass, but saw nothing. After a while, I found the beer glass on the carpet in front of the bookcase standing upright. I picked it up to examine it, but there was not a scratch on its surface. This was really weird. There was no window anywhere near the glass, which explained away the possibility of the wind knocking it over, but the glass itself is pretty heavy. I placed it back and brushed it off and resumed to bed. Something like that hasn't happened again though. Second, this happened to me several years ago when I was still in high school. My friend came to visit me for the week because we were working on a project, and it would be easier for her to just come over to my place than my mum having to drop her off at the farm they lived on at the time. My room was a small space next to my parents' room at the back of the house, with our big window facing the backyard and the pool area. This evening, after doing some work on our project, we had supper and then went to bed after showering. She slept on my bed, while I slept on a mattress on the floor, and we spent a good while just talking about, mostly, what to do next with our project, and some other silly things. I think it was close to midnight when we finally decided it was time for sleep. Now, I was somewhere between awake and asleep, just starting to ease away, when I was very suddenly hit with this crushing, overwhelming sense of fear. Nothing happened, but I was scared beyond shitless, and I don't know why. I just was, and I didn't know what to do. Somehow, I started crying, and this woke my friend up. So she had me go onto bed with her, and we spent several hours huddled together at the top of the bed while she held me, and just prayed for me. I have no idea how long it was before I finally calmed down, and we could both get some sleep. I think her prayers saved me that night, and it has continued to protect me since, as nothing like that happened to me again. I often like to say that my family, my home, and me, we're in a bubble protection of sorts, something I'm definitely grateful for.
I was once driving in Indiana, between Lake Station and Valparaiso. I think it must have been about 5:15 in the morning. There were a few deer about to cross the road, so I slowed down and stopped in order to let them cross. One of them looked right at me, tilted its head like it was considering something, then stood on its back legs and walked across the road. The rest of the deer followed suit, standing on their hind legs and strutting across the worn asphalt. I was training with my foreman that week, and he just looked at me and asked if I'd seen it too. I didn't answer. I just floored it. Another time I was swimming in Lake Michigan, and I felt something profoundly old. The lake was carved into the earth by utterly enormous glaciers, ancient and implacable, and there was something equally old, equally unyielding about that lake. It regarded me, and I felt nothing but contempt and dismal from it. I swam back to shore, opened my flask, and lay on the warm sand. I must have dozed off, because next thing I knew I was at the water's edge, dressed in a crisp blue suit. I smelled ash and ozone, and even though I didn't look behind me, I knew Chicago was burning. I walked into Lake Michigan, and I woke up just as my head went underwater. I'd been dreaming. I washed my face, took the train home, and tried to forget about it. The most recent one is malicious. When I lived with my parents, I woke up one night and felt someone staring at me. I looked around and saw him, an impossibly tall man with skin as dark as coal, wearing a top hat and staring at me. I felt something shaking and saw my German shepherd lying next to me, shaking and growling at him. He glanced at her, looked directly at me, and smiled a horrifyingly wide smile of crooked, chipped teeth. He reached out, grabbed a small box I'd left on the desk, said something in a language I didn't recognize, and vanished. Immediately my dog started whining and licking my face. I couldn't go back to sleep, but I just thought it was a nightmare. I took Lola on a very long walk until my legs felt like lead and passed out. When I woke up a few hours later, I noticed something. The box was not on my desk. It was not in my room. It was gone, and I haven't seen it since. I can't be certain that the last two really happened. I do have depression, and I'll occasionally have bouts of paranoia and terror. I still don't know what happened to that box, and I really don't care enough to find out. I just know that the world is a much bigger and older place than most people care to acknowledge, and in no way have we conquered it. At most, we have survived it. I grew up in a small town in Maryland, right on the borders of Pennsylvania and Delaware. We moved into our neighborhood in 1974, and I was an infant. The builders had 3 styles you could choose from, and one being a pretty unique design. I always wished my parents would have picked that one. There is only one other neighborhood I know that must have been built by the same people. Across the border in Delaware, I've lived all over, and I've also had jobs as a cable installer, so I'm pretty familiar with most neighborhoods in the area and design and layout. Back in the early 60s, there was a plane crash that would have been a 10-minute walk from my house. Over 80 people passed during the incident. Pan Am Flight 214. Ghost stories and sightings were all part of my childhood, but not really related to what happened to me. My family moved to Virginia in 1991, and with the exception of one childhood friend, I had no ties with the area after that. I joined the military, and then I took a job out in Utah. After some strange life happenings, I had the opportunity to move my wife and young son back to this same small town. It was a great place to grow up. Well, it was back in the 80s, but there are so many problems there now. We didn't move to the same neighborhood, but rented an apartment not too far away, a couple of miles at most from my childhood home. My wife worked the midnight shift, and often my son would sleep in our bed when she was at work. He was around 5 at the time. It was somewhere around 11 p.m., and my son was in there fast asleep. I went in and had just pulled him in close. I just love cuddling him. I really missed those times. I hadn't even turned on the TV yet. I'm one of those weirdos who has to have it on to fall asleep. I had just gotten underneath the covers. And as a kid, everyone called me Kenny. But everyone since high school called me Ken. Well, just as I was about to grab the remote and turn on the TV, I hear my name whispered. Kenny. I laid perfectly still for a few more minutes listening. I didn't even want to breathe. Did my wife come home? Beside her, very few people call me Kenny, and nobody within 1,500 miles. Maybe there are people outside and I could hear them. Did I leave the TV on in the living room? Birds? Upstairs neighbors? I finally relaxed. I mean, what could it be? Then it happened again. Kenny. This time a more forceful whisper, possibly agitated, possibly trying to get my attention but not wanting to wake up my son. The worst part? As it said my name, the hairs on the back of my head parted with its breath. Both my parents passed away in '97 in unrelated events. They never met their grandchildren, and I often wonder if my mother came to visit. I can't be 100% sure, but it sounded feminine, although very raspy. I've never been so afraid. I just knew if I rolled over, somebody would have been there. I must have laid there for hours before drifting off finally. I didn't tell a soul about this, not my wife, not my best friend, nobody. About 2 weeks go by and I had trained this guy at work. He became a pretty good friend at the time, and we learned we had extremely similar backstories. He grew up in the same house style I did in Delaware, and we also went to the same very small private school. People who grew up in the area don't even know it's there. There were only 13 other kids in my 8th grade class. Same car growing up, parents had similar backstories. It was a bit uncanny but nothing too crazy. Well, one night, we were hanging out and he said something to the effect of, "Please don't make fun of me, but I have something to tell you," and proceeded to tell me an almost identical tale of what happened to him. I'd never told anyone, and we have no idea if they are related, but he said he was laying in bed at 1 a.m. and someone whispered his name twice. He got up, looked around, had a smoke, and decided to just stay up for the rest of the night. Not sure what that means, or if the two events were related, but it really freaked us out. Being only 4 years old, I showered with my mum's help. Since I was little, I've had a very wild imagination, as everyone put it. One day, my mother was starting a shower, but I refused to get anywhere near the bathroom. She told me that she found my actions against her very unusual, since I was very well behaved as a child, and never spoke out against my parents or gave them a hard time. However, no matter what she did, she could not get me to step foot in the bathroom whatsoever. Her bathroom was located in the back of her bedroom, and you had to pass her bed before you got into the bathroom. I sat at the furthest point on the bed from the bathroom, crying, trying to tell my mother that I didn't want to shower. Normally, this would be a regular temper tantrum, but since I wasn't the typical child, my mother was frightened. So she got to my level and tried talking to me, and asked me why I didn't want to go into the bathroom. She then thought about a recent experience my father had in the bathroom, which scared him so much, he said he would never step foot in there again. She then proceeded to ask me if I felt like something was in there, to which I nodded. I agreed to go into the bathroom and show her if she were holding me, and to not let me down. We proceeded to go into the bathroom and she asked, "Okay, what's bothering you in here? What do you see?" I led her to the shower and pointed at one of the small brown tiles that made up our shower wall. She freaked out. Apparently, about a week before this, my dad was showering and he screamed for my mother. He pointed at the same brown tile and told her that there was something evil in it. He then declared that he would never step foot into that bathroom again, and did stay true to his word all 8 years that we remained in the house. I never did get my shower that day, but cut to about 4 months later, my parents held a little house party with a few co-workers and friends. All bathrooms were occupied, and my mother's friend Lily really needed to go. She trusted her, so she sent her to her own bedroom. A few minutes pass, and Lily returns very shaken up. She shows my mum a photo she just took of the shower wall. This was when smartphones were newer and had only just started to come out. The picture was of poor quality, but her friend zoomed into the same tile. My mum's friend then chose to leave. Years after, my mum then decided to share this story with me, and how badly it scared her. My father is very religious, so this story scared him as well, and doesn't like it when anyone brings it up. He never mentioned or talked about it ever again. About a year before we moved, my mother told me this story and took me to the bathroom to see if I could still point it out. I took a long look and pointed to the 3rd row, 9th tile. It was the correct tile. My mother just got a glare in her eye and walked out the bathroom. Every time I walked into the bathroom, I got uneasy and wanted to get the hell out of there. I still question as to what the hell freaked everyone out in that tile, and I still get chills thinking about it. When my daughter was about a year old, we moved into a 2-story townhouse, kitchen and living room downstairs, bedrooms upstairs. One day, when I was walking from the living room to the kitchen, I saw what looked like a large black cloud in the middle of the room that quickly disappeared into the ceiling. I brushed it off as my eyes adjusting to the light in the room and forgot about it. But shortly thereafter, I started noticing my daughter would sit in the middle of the kitchen and babble away like she was talking to someone. And almost every night, she would wake up at 2 a.m. and start chattering away. After watching something on TV, I decided that maybe it wasn't just a lot of random events, and maybe there was something there. One day, I stood in my bedroom, introduced myself, and said that if there was someone there who wanted to communicate with me, I would listen. The next day I woke up to a tapping in the room. It took a few minutes to find the source. The corner of a poster hanging on the wall was being pulled out a few inches and then let go, so that it would hit the wall. No AC on, no open windows. I laid there and watched for a few minutes, then decided I was too chicken to respond and ran out of the room. A few nights later, I woke up with the feeling of someone being in the room with us. The room was pitch black, which is unusual since we had a nightlight in the bathroom in case we had to get up with the baby. I looked at my clock to see if the power had gone off, but it was still working. Once my eyes adjusted a little more, I could see a moving mass in the doorway, like a black cloud but moving. I put the covers over my head and pretended it wasn't there, but didn't wake up my husband, who didn't know anything about the other experiences either. Later that week, my daughter wakes up at 2 a.m, chatter time, but this time she is screaming. One night I fell asleep on the couch downstairs and woke up to my husband thundering down the stairs. He tells me he woke up feeling like something was watching him and saw a mass of black smoke in the doorway. He ran through it on his way out of the room and said it felt like electricity. A few minutes later, the baby started screaming. This continued for weeks. The screaming every night, feeling like someone was watching us, seeing black blurs out of the corner of our eyes. In November, I found out my grandmother was dying. The day that I received the call was the last sleepless night we had. It was almost like it took pity on us and left us alone. This isn't the only experience I've had, but they always seem to center around my daughter. She's 14 now, and I have encouraged her to retain her ability to talk to and see things that most people cannot. One day when I was 18 or so, I started to walk up the steps to my bedroom. At the top of the stairs there was a ledge that my dad's ex had a statue of two fairies fishing. On my way up the stairs, it came flying at my head. I moved out of the way and was like, whoa, what the hell? So I walked back down the steps, picked up the fairies, and put them both back where they belonged. I went to tell my dad about it and went into his bedroom. As I started my story, his laundry basket moved from his side of the bedroom over to the side of the room I was on. I was like, well, good night, Dad, and hid under the covers the rest of the night. My dad doesn't believe in ghosts, but even he cannot explain that one. Another time, I was in my bedroom with my ex, and we were getting ready for bed. My dog was asleep on the bed already, until he all of a sudden started low growling and showing his teeth at my closet. His head was low, his ears were flat, and he growled and followed nothing from the closet all the way around my bed towards the bedroom door. He then followed it from the back door to the closet, hackles up, growling getting heavier. When it got back to the closet, he jumped off the bed and went to the other side of the room. My dog was shaken up, my ex was shaken up, and I was shaken up. To lighten the mood, I said, I'm not afraid of no ghosts, and closed my door. Before I could even turn around, the closet door which I had just closed busted open, and I jumped back onto the bed. My closet door is an accordion-style door, and it's been broken since we moved in. You have to lift it off the tracks at the bottom, and then pull it. I checked to make sure my cat wasn't in there and maybe freaked when I closed the door, but my bedroom door was closed, so unless he could suddenly shift through the doors, he wasn't in my room. We all slept under the covers that night. When my dad's girlfriend passed away, he made a DVD of a bunch of pictures with her family and her friends in them. He had it in the DVD player, but when we were watching TV, the DVD player wasn't on, and the input for the cable box wasn't either. While watching, the power in the house goes out for a split second, and the TV boots back. I thought it was weird because we lose power frequently, and then TV never turns itself back on. I write it off. Then, all of a sudden, the DVD player is on, playing her slideshow. When we watched it with my dad, it had a menu screen you had to interact with to get it to start. But this time it just booted up. I took the disc out, put it away, and unplugged the DVD player. My doorknob was moving on and off all night. I opened the door halfway to make sure it wasn't my brother playing a prank. I saw the doorknob moving on both sides of the door on its own all night. I always had a feeling that something did not like me in that house. I was 13 and living at my mum's. That is, for me, specifically. My mum has had strange experiences at that house that she has either brushed off or attributed to her imagination. She was looking at a picture of her deceased grandpa and said she loved him, and the light switch flipped on. My little brother also witnessed this. My spouse seems to attract ghosts. When we first met, the light switch in the room turned on and off on its own about 3 times. He acted like it was normal and told me not to worry about it. Later, he told me about the thing that follows him around and how it pushed him down the stairs once after he and his friends had taunted it. When he was with his ex, he went to a party that had a psychic lady, and she said that something bad was following him around. He has a lot more weird stories about the thing, and it did make its presence known. I actually did not get a bad feeling from whatever it was, but odd things would definitely happen, especially when we talked about it. One night we were talking about it, and I thought maybe it was all in our heads, and before we could go back down the stairs to the basement, the motion detector and hand soap went off 7 times in a row by itself. We were on the other sides of the room, which had never randomly gone off before or acted up in strange ways. Another night, I got the courage to ask it to leave, nicely, but I didn't get the feeling it was inherently evil. It hasn't bothered him since, but I think it still hangs around at his mum's house since we moved out. The last time I visited his mum's house was when I was followed by his shadow and I went down to the basement, which surprised me because she did not believe in the paranormal. My spouse also has weird predictions/prophetic dreams. He dreamed of me 2 years before we even met, while he was still with his ex-girlfriend. He said he told his ex that he was in a truck, although he didn't have a truck at the time, with a girl, me. That wasn't her, and there were weird distinct bumps and lights on the road, which are specific to my area. I didn't believe him until I met her 3 years later, and she corroborated the story. She was really worried about it before they broke up. He had a dream of us having a baby, but sometimes I'm afraid he's gonna dream of a different girl, and we'll break up just like what happened with his ex. I think we will have a happy ending though. It's been 5 years since we were together, and we're getting married in July.
We are renting a house right now that tends to be a bit spooky. One night, my girlfriend and I went to bed as usual. We have the master bedroom, which has a bathroom attached to it. The door to the bathroom only has the ability to lock if you press this little button behind the handle from the inside. So I closed the bathroom door like every night, so that I know it wasn't locked when I closed it. We went to sleep, and I ended up having a pretty sketchy dream. The dream started in my childhood home, and I was in my sister's room. and was looking out of the doorway into the hallway, and saw a shadow figure clearly around the corner, standing in front of the light. I didn't hesitate, and I ran to the hallway to fight whatever it was. As I turned to face the figure, I swung at what I could only consider an extraterrestrial, which was all black, and the face was just terrifying. The alien was also giving off some kind of black smoky gas. A substance was evaporating off its body. As soon as my hand hit it, it went right through it, and time slowed down, as did my arm, and I realized I couldn't even touch it. I went back to sleep, and when I woke up for work, I went to go into the bathroom to take a shower, and the bathroom door was locked. There's no lock on the outside, so I couldn't get in. During the commotion, I awoke my girlfriend and asked her if she had locked the door. She said no, and then mentioned that she had a scary dream. I said it was weird, as so had I. She started off by saying that it was in her childhood home, and my jaw dropped further. She said that she was there for someone's birthday, and after looking all around the house, no one was there. So she decided to leave the house, and as soon as she got to the front door, she was locked in, and something was coming behind her. She struggled with the door and could not get it open and began to panic, because whatever it was coming quickly. Before it could even get to her, she woke up because she could not bear to turn around to see what it could have been. We never figured out how the door locked itself, and just to add to the weirdness, the bathroom is on a motion sensor and will turn on in the middle of the night for no reason. I turned down the sensitivity, but it still turns on here and there, which could be a technological flaw, but strange regardless.
This happened to me in 2012. I was traveling with a friend from El Paso, Texas, to Ruidoso, New Mexico. It's a trip that takes a little less than 3 hours. It was dark, and it was also a very lonely road. After 2 hours on the road, we passed through this abandoned town with an old Wild West style tavern in the middle, and we thought it was pretty creepy. But I told my friend we should turn around and go enter the abandoned tavern. We did that, and when we were turning around, there was a sign that told the name of the town was Oro Grande. We stopped in a place and we stepped out the car. There were no lights at all, and when we had walked a couple of meters beyond our car, we heard 5 to 10 dogs barking at us from nowhere. We noped out of there immediately, got in the car and went to Ruidoso, and arrived 20 to 30 minutes after that incident. 3 days after, on our way back from the trip, it wasn't nighttime yet, so I told him that we should step onto the tavern and ask for a beer, because we had chickened out last time. And we started going back, and there was no sign from the town. We stopped at a gas station and asked where the hell that town was, and they told us it was about 30 minutes from El Paso, and it was obvious we didn't stop and just continued our ride. We didn't understand anything at all, because on our first ride, Oro Grande, the town, was 30 minutes away from Ruidoso, and on our way back, the town was about 30 minutes away from El Paso. To this day, I don't understand what the hell happened to me and my friends, and we haven't talked about it much since. I grew up around my grandmother in her century-old farmhouse in deep South Texas. She was the oldest daughter to Hungarian immigrant parents. I remember being told by very serious adults that she was different. She'd use playing cards and tell people's fortunes, but she'd be very specific, like that you'd be in a car accident because the red truck in front of you had its rear left tire blown out and you'll break your arm. I was also told that they would call her to tell her about something, and she'd know about it already, even though there was no possible way. In the middle of this, 3 sets of bones were discovered on the property, identified as migrants and several decades old. That's when things got weird. Faces started appearing in reflections on glass, even though no one was there to cast them. Things would move around in the kitchen and bathroom. Sounds of walking would be heard when everyone was sitting. Howling winds could be heard when the night was without a breeze. What haunted me into adulthood was the closet. The fan control was in the closet, and I'd often leave it open on my way to the bed. One night I was having trouble sleeping, but my attention became locked on the closet. That's when someone walked out, around the foot of the bed, and out the far door into the music room. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I have never been so scared before or since. I got up, closed both doors, and kept all doors closed around me as I sleep, even now. I told my grandmother what happened, who called a Catholic priest who she knew. The 2 of them performed an exorcism, and things improved. But I can't fathom what happened. I know she was a special woman. I know what happened has no explanation, and I keep trying to tell myself that I'll be happier sticking my head in the sand. My wife and I travelled to South Africa a few months ago and spent some time in Kruger National Park. The first night we stayed at one of the less developed camps, which was definitely cooler than the more built up ones that felt like smaller cities, called Biamiti. It was around 9:30 or so, and we had just returned from a guided sunset drive. I was with the wife out on the patio, drinking a glass of wine and enjoying the sounds of nature, when my body told me that I was ready to rid myself of that wonderful airplane food I had eaten earlier. The cottage that we were staying at had a living room, bedroom, and bathroom. The bathroom had 2 doors and was accessible from either room. The door going into the bedroom must have been a bit warped because it didn't really play nice when you closed it. Knowing that I was about to unleash some hell, I made damn sure that the door was completely closed and the latch engaged. So there I am, sitting atop my porcelain throne with cell phone in hand playing some forgettable game while I did my business. As I finish part 1 of this 2-step, I see the bedroom door handle moving down and the door swings open about 4 inches. Now I have a history of turning bathrooms into a disaster zone, so my wife knows to stay far away while I'm on the can. Hello? I mutter vulnerably. It's hard to feel like a badass when you're on the cam with your shorts around your ankles. There's no response. So the wife must be messing with me. She has to be. I saw the handle move downwards. At this point, the goosebumps have kicked in, and my heart starts beating like a bass drum. I hastily make with the toilet paper and head back to the patio. Why did you open the door while I was pooping? My wife replies, What are you talking about? Are you kidding me? No, that's the last place I'd want to be. You're really not kidding with me? No. I sit down with some more wine, still wondering what actually happened, and could not come up with a reasonable explanation. Needless to say, we slept with a light on in the living room, like a couple of children, in case Ghosty decided to come back. I worked for a title company that required me to travel to people's homes and execute loan transfers from one bank to another. Most of the time, the homes were within a 50-mile radius of the office, but on rare occasions it did require me to travel further. This is the time I met someone/something I can't comprehend. I am a completely sane individual. and I like to think that I have a good grip on reality. This closing I was driving to was in eastern Ohio, maybe 30 miles from the Pennsylvania border, and it was in the middle of nowhere. This was over 10 years ago, before smartphones and Google Maps were a thing, where I needed to rely on printed directions via MapQuest. For this closing, MapQuest gave me directions, but a vague idea to where the actual home was located. In situations like this, I would typically get as close as possible, stop at a gas station and ask for directions, and then continue. However, this time I couldn't find a gas station, market, library, nothing. This was during the middle of the day in late summer, and I was in no rush, so I took my time. Going through this hilly valley, a very beautiful part of Ohio, looking for a certain intersection. I made a handful of passes throughout this town, but no luck, and turned around once again. When I was making my return, I spotted an old bearded man on the side of the road, sitting on a rock minding his own business. It was just him and I who were on the road. I pulled over, rolled my window down and asked him for help. He smiled, never getting up off his rock that he was resting on, looked at me in the eyes and gave me instructions and pointed where to go with his cane. Except he spoke to me in some language. I can't place it. It wasn't Spanish, German, French or Slavic languages. It was like tongues. I just nodded, said thanks and pretended like I understood. Eventually I made it to the next town and found my way. I wasn't spooked, but later, at the closing, when I shared this story with the client, I was informed I possibly met this elusive figure that had been spotted in the surrounding area. He's been known to wave to people and then disappear, but no one has ever spoken to him before me. How lucky. My father and I used to live in this Victorian-style house in northern central Wisconsin some years back. I lived in that house from ages 6 to 12 and have seen and heard some unexplainable stuff. I also wasn't the only one to see that. My father told me it was almost a daily thing for him at one point when I grew up. It was our first Thanksgiving dinner in the house. I was 7 at the time. My parents are divorced, but my father invited my mother to Thanksgiving dinner so that she wouldn't be alone. My grandmother also drove down from Upper Michigan to celebrate the holiday with us. We are just setting up the dinner table. My grandmother was on one side of the table and my mother was on the other. I was walking into the room when a coaster just gently glided across the dining room. Everyone stops, looks at me and asked if I threw the coaster like a frisbee. I was shocked and responded no. How can I throw it when my hands are full? At the time, I was carrying in the mashed potatoes. Everyone very slowly looks down, and I could see the shock and confused, scared look on their faces. They questioned me about it throughout the night. It freaked me out. The next event was when I was home alone one summer vacation when my father was gone at work. I was 9 years old at the time, sleeping in from a long night of TV. I woke up to the TV getting louder and louder. I could also hear people having a conversation in the living room, which is where the TV was. I walked downstairs calling for my dad and received no reply. And as I got down to about halfway down the stairs, the TV shut off. So I creep around and find no one home at all. I ran back upstairs and stayed in my bed until my dad came home from lunch. Another unexplained event happened a few weeks later. Father and I went out to go do some grocery shopping, and we were gone for a few hours or so. When we came back, we found all of the clocks in the house were all dead and stopped at different times. I honestly don't even know what happened. Then there's one more experience, when I was 11. I was downstairs in the basement home alone doing laundry and heard the back door open and close hard. Naturally, I thought my dad was home, and I walk up the basement stairs and hear a woman with heels walking on the hardwood floor. I also see a shadow cast under the door. As I got to the top, I opened the door to find no one in the house. When I was around 10 or 11, I lived in this small town in Missouri. Well, I always thought my house was haunted, but I could never get proof to show my mum. One night I was laying in my room with my door closed, and I just couldn't go to sleep. Keep in mind that my room is on the other side of the house, but my front door is very loud. To picture this moment better, you have to have an understanding of my old home. When you walk in the house from the front door, there is an open living room, dining room and kitchen. Then you go down this long hallway and there are rooms and bathrooms, and the bedroom is on the right, and across from that is my older brother Zach's room, who was at college at this time. Then on the same side of Zach's room is my mother's room. Then right across from hers is my room, then a closet at the end of the hallway. Well, I was laying in bed and Zach had come home from work, and he was already asleep as I could hear him snoring. And all of a sudden, I hear slow footsteps coming down the hallways. It sounded like they started at the front of the hallway, and they sound like big boots. While I'm freaking out, I could hear it come right in front of my door. Then I heard my mum cough and then turn over. Right as she did, the footsteps stopped and turned back around, and slowly walked down the hallway and disappeared at the front of the hallway. Whoever it was never opened a door or window, because my house is pretty old. Another time, a few months after the incident, my mum was actually watching TV in the living room, and I was about to fall asleep, when all of a sudden I heard, "Get out," right by my ear. I could even feel the hotness on my ear, and it sounded like a little girl. Then, I just kept my eyes closed for 30 seconds and yelled for my mother. Another time something like that happened was when I was in my mum's room laying down, and all of a sudden I hear a man's voice in the same room as me. My father didn't live with me at the time, and Zach was at work. I couldn't make out what he said, but it obviously freaked me out. I live about 3 hours away from there now, and nothing has happened. I hope nothing more does occur. When I was in first grade, my parents bought a piece of land for dirt cheap. It was in an area of town which was known to be cursed land. A lot of people warned my mum not to buy it, but she couldn't resist the price. They started trying to build a wall along the perimeter by the river that ran alongside it, and each day they would start work again. Somehow they'd find the wall torn down, and no one knew why. So one day my mum dragged me to the construction site after school, and I guess I was throwing a tantrum. One of the workers told me to shut up, because the spirits will fixate on me if I made a fuss. Apparently they saw a ball of light roaming around the property, which was said to be a bad spirit. That night, I started throwing up blood. A bucket. I remember holding a bucket. I felt nauseous and confused, but didn't feel like I was sick. My parents rushed me to the ER, and all the nurses and doctors were very confused, because the type of blood that I was throwing up wasn't my blood type. Desperate, my mum called a witch doctor. She looked insane, and I remember her well. She looked like she had stepped out of a cheesy, scary movie. White long hair, wrinkly skin, and looked to be at least 100. She started smudging me with what was probably sage, and was chanting, and the whole thing went on for about an hour. Then suddenly I stopped throwing up, and she started throwing up the blood, almost like she took whatever was happening to me away and putting it into her. I forgot exactly how she got rid of whatever malevolent force that was. I just remember her telling my parents that I had one foot in the spirit world and one in the human. That's why I was so vulnerable to attack, and I'll never forget that. That memory remains with me today. I cannot shake it off. Until now, that piece of land remains empty, and I'm glad my parents were able to sell it. I have reactive attachment disorder, and as a result I struggle with severe depression. However, I don't want to take any medication. I say that because I was going through one of the worst bouts of depression I've had in about 1.5 years, and I wasn't hallucinating because of medication. It was Tuesday night or Wednesday morning, October 13th to 14th. I'd cried myself to sleep like I had for however many hours before. When I woke up, it was 3:34. My cat Betty was walking around on the bed, and for some reason the alarm on my phone was going off. I use the Sleep Cycle app, and it was going off although the alarm wasn't set until 5:30 to 6. So I'm frustrated that it's decided to stop working correctly. Then I hear that my computer in the living room turns on. I thought my other cat, Vader, must have knocked the mouse walking over the desk. Then I see the light turn on from the monitor. What? I thought. I was kind of pissed, so I started grumbling. Damn cats, Betty stomping all around and Vader turning stuff on. Until I turned on the bedside lamp. Both cats are laying at the end of my bed, looking into the living room. I froze. I was so confused. I was trying to make sense of it when I heard my front door open. Like the screen door first, and then the front doorknob, and then I heard it move across the carpet. Unlike the movies, I jumped out of bed as quietly as possible, wondering how the hell someone was coming into our apartment, as I was sure I'd locked the door. I silently stepped into the hall and peeked around the corner. My cats nonchalantly decided it was time to ignore the obvious murderer entering our home. I peek around the corner, and the door is closed. The lights are off, the monitor is off, but I can hear the computer running. I stood there for who knows how long. I still can't make sense of it. I couldn't sleep the rest of the night. It wasn't a dream. Maybe I was sleepwalking. I don't know. But I've never been afraid in my apartment, and at that moment I felt very afraid, and very much not alone. It hasn't happened again. I just don't know. This story is from the friend of my mum and her husband. They had just had their first baby and had bought an old house in the middle of nowhere in southwest Sweden. The husband worked at sea and was gone weeks at a time, leaving his wife and their newborn at home. It wasn't long after they moved in while he was away at sea that she started to feel uncomfortable in the house, like just a feeling that something was off. She started to get this sensation more and more, but like me, being a skeptic, she brushed it off as a feeling of loneliness since her husband was away. But then it evolved to more than just a feeling. At night, she thought she could hear footsteps on the stairs leading up to the second floor where she and the baby were asleep. She continued to try and convince herself that this also was something she imagined, half awake, half asleep, and tried to convince herself that it was an old house with wooden stairs and that old houses make. But it continued almost every night, and she started to get a bit freaked out as soon as day turned to night. She would also notice the baby would focus on certain points in the ceiling and suddenly stop or start crying. More than newborns usually do, and more frequent flipping from crying to total silence, and a look of deep concentration while staring straight up, as if there was something there to focus on. The mother continued to try and explain the noises with rational thinking, and this being her first child, she tried to convince herself that it was normal behavior for a newborn. Only a few weeks old anyway. Then one day in the middle of the day, when the kid was upstairs in the crib sleeping and her downstairs in the kitchen, did she hear footsteps on the stairs. Only this time they were really loud, and then a thud, as if someone had slammed the door. She just froze up until she heard her baby crying bloody murder. She ran up the stairs to not only find the door to the bedroom closed, something she never did so that she could hear the baby, but the baby was on the floor screaming. Remember, this baby is only a few weeks old. There's no way he could even sit up by himself, let alone climb out of a crib and crawl to the center of the room. After that, they sold the house and moved away. I've heard this story from the lady herself, and she's an honest and very good friend. I trust her very much, and after hearing this, I try to keep an open mind about the paranormal in the world. A year ago, my family moved into our new house that we're renting. I've had two odd experiences in two different rooms, one being very recent, the first being late winter. The first experience was very short, but freaky. I had wandered into my room and flopped onto my bed. I began playing with my tablet when I heard this horrendous noise. Something had dragged, something across the outer wall of my room. It sounded like a person taking a bone or nails and running it along the outer wall of my room. I ran over to my window and threw open the blinds, but nothing was there. My room at the time, since I switched recently, had no brush, trees or anything pressed against the house. What makes it scarier is that outside my room is a large tank that blocks part of the outer wall of my room. Something had somehow avoided that getting in the way. My second story happened a few days ago. I was home alone with my younger brother. We live in California and earthquakes are very frequent. I have a huge fear of them, which will explain my reaction. I was in my room lying in bed. I was awake checking my phone and was just too lazy to get up. My younger was playing Xbox in the living room, and I threw open YouTube and suddenly I'm nearly thrown off my bed. It was like an earthquake. My bed shook violently for a split second and nothing else in my room moved. But I didn't care at the time. I sprung up and ran to grab my brother when I noticed he was perfectly fine. He even looked at me like I was being weird, so I walked around the house and noticed nothing had changed. I was still so shaken up, I had to message a friend to get her to calm me down. I don't even know what happened. A few years ago, I was driving back to my house from a friend's house at 2 a.m. I was getting close to my house in a really rural area with cornfields on both sides of the road. All of a sudden, I saw stalks of corn blocking my path, going straight across the road from one field to another. Nobody was around, there were no cars, no houses, and just my headlights were shining on upright corn stalks standing across the road, as thick as the fields on either side. I knew I wasn't lost or anything. I drove home this way every day and stopped the car on the road and just staring at the cornstalks trying to figure out what the hell to do. After sitting there for a minute, I decided that staring at the corn waiting for something to happen was much scarier than doing something. So I hit the gas hoping the corn would just fall down in front of my small car. It was one of the strangest feelings driving through the corn. I imagine it is what it would feel like to run through platform 9 3/4 of Harry Potter. 1 second, I was staring at what seemed to be a solid cornfield, and the next, my car is easily knocking the stalks over as I was through. The rows of corn across the road weren't as deep as I had thought, and in no time I was on the other side, looking in the rearview mirror at the wall of corn with now a gaping hole in it. I went home, went to bed still freaked out. The next morning I went to leave, drove down the same road, and the only sign of the corn were a few stalks laying next to the road. I still have no idea how that happened, but the corn was gone by morning. It must have been ghost corn. We moved into a house, and everything was really quiet for the first 6 months or so. The neighbors told us that the people who lived there before had moved after their teenage son died in a motorcycle accident. Then after the first 6 months, my dad died, not in the house. And after that, stuff started to happen. I would have friends sleep over, and one night my friend woke me up because she said there was a young guy standing in my bathroom. So I went and checked, and there was nothing. Over the next few years, just about any friends that stayed over at night had said they saw a small, tall, blonde guy walking around the house. We did have a few other things happen, like a wine glass was on the counter and it broke, with no one touching it. It just shattered on the counter. Another time during the winter, we had the heater on and my room was always the warmest in the house, and it was ice cold as you walked across my bedroom to the bathroom that was connected. The creepiest thing was when my boyfriend was sleeping on the couch in the middle of the night, and he said he woke up to a young guy pushing him off onto the floor. He said the guy didn't say anything, but my boyfriend at the time knew that he had to leave, and he did. He wouldn't stay at my place after that either. Just to go into further detail about the glass, my mum had a collection of glassware. She had so many that there weren't many places to put them anymore, so we just set them on the counter. The wine glass had been sitting there untouched for a long time. It hadn't just come out the dishwasher or anything like that. She just put it on the counter, and there it stayed. When it broke, no one was near, only me and my mum were there, and we were both 10 feet away at least. Could it have been something like a crack in the glass? Maybe. But at the time it startled us, and we thought it was bizarre. When I was very young, my grandmother had a painting that hung in the living room of her old house. This painting was of 2 women playing the piano, one playing while the other listened and pointed at the music, as if in the act of teaching the song. I would often sleep over at her house as a child. I have countless distinct memories of seeing the figures in the painting move at night, not in an intelligent way, but in a sort of acting out the scene sort of way. Almost like how a GIF is on the internet nowadays. Constant, looped actions. The woman playing the piano would begin to actually strike the keys and tap her foot to the rhythm, while the other woman would nod her head in approval or disapproval as she judged the performance. There was no sound. I was so young and saw the painting do this so often that I thought nothing of it, and accepted the idea that some paintings out there can move on their own. Decades later, I remembered the painting and noticed I hadn't seen it in many years. I asked my now very old grandmother about it, and she told me she had wrapped it in cloth and locked it away in her closet. I jokingly told her that as a child, I thought I saw the painting move at night. She went dead silent and said to me in a very serious tone, "My dear, why do you think I don't put it up anymore? Thanks for telling me you saw it too. I thought I was crazy all these years." My name is Diego. Me and my girlfriend have a few problems. We live in a house together with 4 cats, but over the last few months, stuff randomly disappears. Today, this morning, I searched for my money because I left it in my jacket, but it wasn't there, and it was nowhere else to be found. It's the second time that this has happened, and we had the same problem that money disappeared and we didn't find it. And our cats are randomly meowing towards walls, to things that aren't there. They are peeing on random places even though we did help them, so we don't think that's the problem. Sometimes late at night, my cat meows to the hallway even if there's nothing there. A year back, She told me that when she had a Christmas card from her sister, she stuck it to her door, but that night the card turned 180 degrees and fell down from the door. She told me later that her mum passed away and that perhaps this was her doing, but that's hard to say. And I'm now experiencing lots of nightmares every week, and those are terrifying. It wakes me up at night, and I always stare into a corner, even though there's nothing there. This morning, me and my girlfriend were fighting about this as it's driving us crazy, and we don't know what to do, because she thinks it's a poltergeist that's annoying us, but it's hard to say because you can't prove it. And, honestly, I could just use with some help. This happened when I was around 7 or 8 years old, but I remember it very clearly. Just some background. Our family is religious and are Catholic. I was playing Jenga with my siblings and cousins. It was getting really late, maybe 12 AM to 1 AM. My mum didn't know that we were still up and playing, but when she woke up in the middle of the night and told us to go to sleep, we said that we weren't sleepy. To that she replied, "El diablo va a aparecer." In other words, the devil is going to appear. She was trying to scare us to put it away, but of course we didn't listen. Now my mum has always told us that ghosts are real and that she believes highly in them but is not afraid. She has told us countless stories of her experiences. Anyway, I don't know, but all stopped playing because we heard something. We all listened, and sure enough, the sound was easy to make out. The distinct sound of chains dragging a horse walking. This was right outside our home. It was like whatever the hell it was wanted us to know that it was outside, because it went on for at least 45 seconds. Now keep in mind that we didn't live in an area where you can hear horses. We lived 2 blocks away from a major freeway in Los Angeles. Now I'm not crazy and I'm not imagining this because everyone that lived in my house heard it. Sure enough, my mum comes out and says, "I told you so." Sure enough, none of us were able to sleep that night. Luckily I was young, so sleeping with my parents was acceptable, but my sister was inconsolable. I was a busser at a restaurant in Philadelphia during undergraduate school. We had an upstairs bar, and most of the restaurant was on the ground floor. I was working a Friday night once, and we closed around midnight. Early for a bar, but most of our sales were from food. The bartender went back to do bills and whatnot, and I was mopping the upstairs floor near the bar. All of the lights were on, front door locked, and I could hear people on the street outside. Nothing scary. When I heard the front door open and slam, I figured it was our bartender. I look at the stairs and see a guy walk up. I stop mopping and wonder who it is. I'd been working there for 6 months, so I knew all the staff, but I didn't recognize the guy, but figured he was a new dishwasher or something, and clearly had keys to unlock the door. As I'm staring at him, he turns and looks at me, smiles, but keeps walking and heading to the back. I shrug and figure he's going to the office, which is upstairs through the back door, right where he's going. I continue to mop, and the bartender comes out 20 minutes later. I asked who came in. "Nobody," he says. I swear I saw the guy. He checked the front door and it was locked. We searched all over the restaurant and basement. There was no one. Even after reviewing the security camera, there was nothing. To this day, I chalk it up to hallucinating, but I wasn't on any drugs, was healthy, and was neither tired nor hungry. He did have a nice smile though, and it's what I remember most, just a huge, friendly, goofy grin. I was cleaning up my workroom, which is kind of a shed outside with no windows and a workbench. I had placed my guitar leaning up against a wall while I cleaned and stumbled upon a Ouija board I had made. I'm not into it or anything, I don't believe in ghosts, it was just something I did for my friends, and because none of us had ever done it, we were curious. That's another story though, but I digress. I was standing with the Ouija board just kind of zoning out on it, when the guitar just went bong, like someone had hit the string or the guitar itself. It made the loudest noise. It was so loud that I screamed and jumped nearly out my pants with fear. I looked all around the room for close to an hour for anything that could have fallen on it, bumped it, or otherwise knocked the guitar, and nothing was out of place. I left everything as it was and showed my girlfriend, friends, and anyone I could to get to check it out, because I was going crazy over it. I still can't explain it. Even if something fell on the guitar, it had to have been something heavy and or metal based because of the sheer volume of noise that came out of this thing. I have only shared this with a few people and have not since told anyone until now. I came home from being out with friends of a family-owned franchise at the time, and they were always working. It was dark and about 7 to 8 p.m, and I walked into my bedroom. I was the only one on the first floor of a 2-bedroom house, and most of the lights were off except for the front door outside light. I walked down my hallway like any other day and opened my bedroom door. That's when I heard it clear as day. Someone or something yelled my name. I was going by my nickname these years, and the only people who called me by my name were my family, and they were hours away in another town. It was like I heard someone screaming it at me, like it were angry or that I were being punished. My bedroom was blacked out, and I couldn't see anything. I immediately turned my light on and grabbed a baseball bat and do a search of the entire house, turning on every light to confirm that I am home alone. I am home alone, and someone yelled my name right next to my face, screaming it into my left ear. To this day, I still harbor fear of dark rooms, and don't enter without turning the light on as quickly as possible. I've been deployed twice to Afghanistan, and have been in numerous firefights, but I am still afraid of the dark. If ghosts are real, I grew up with one in my house. It would regularly torture my dog, in that she would frequently yelp and cry in the other room, and hightail it the hell out of there before anything shifty would happen in mine. For clarity, my mother worked night shift, and I was the only one home. While there was always stuff a bit off, like TVs turning off, the volume changing by itself, and sounds of things falling in the kitchen, but then nothing being down there when you check it out, the one thing that still gets me is when I saw a metal candlestick holder sitting on my side drawer fly from one side of the drawer to the other, hard enough to make a noise as it slammed against the side. My second drawer was hanging open, and it flew from right to left. I still can't wrap my mind around it. It's been a very long time since anything strange has happened, and the more time that passes, the more I feel further removed from it, having been a reality. It absolutely happened though. I rarely talk about it though, because it can't be explained, and tends to make me feel uneasy, and that I lose credibility with others. In the past few months, I have started seeing this bright flash which barely lasts a second. I always see it in the same spot from behind the wardrobe. Last night it was about 1:12 a.m. and I heard some music. I usually stay up late. Then I was listening to this song, and all of a sudden there was this bright flash. I was scared of this thing, and somehow I managed to pluck up the courage to say hello out loud. It flashed once again, and I was so scared that the hairs on the back of my head were feeling tingly. And what's more strange is that I was hearing Fix by Coldplay before this first flash, and the song barely started when the first flash came. And only 30 seconds have passed after that, which I came back to my senses, but that was strange. It was weird that it happened with the song. After the flash again happened at 1:17 a.m. I'm pretty sure about what I saw and experienced. I'm an 18-year-old, and my visions are normal and my eyes are good. I'm not highly religious, but this does freak me out. This happened to me last summer, when I was back at my parents' house during the holidays. It was around 3 a.m, and I was in my room on my computer when I got a call from my sister. Now, that was already a little bit weird, since my sister's room is just down the hallway from mine, and she could have just come into my room. I went to pick it up, and the call ended as soon as I reached for the phone. I figured that she just wanted to speak with me, so I got up and went to her room. As soon as I reached the door, she started screaming that someone was in the room with her, so I busted in, and no one was there. After she stopped crying, she told me that she woke up and saw a dark shadow just centimeters from her face, and that's when she screamed. So I told her that she called me, and she said that her phone isn't in her room, and that she was sleeping. Sure enough, her phone was actually downstairs in her purse. The weirdest part is that I have the log of her call on my phone, but she does not. We've never been able to explain that one away. This past summer of 2018, I would sneak out at night. An hour after I would sneak back into my bedroom, a light would shine through my window, almost like it was scanning my window. It was not a car passing by. It seemed like a flashlight shining in. The background of the light was pitch black outside. It usually isn't that dark. I look out after the light has passed, and I wouldn't see anything in front of my actual window. There is a glass storm window to protect my actual window from storms. On a particular night, it wasn't like the other nights when the light would shine. The light shined through my window, and then all of a sudden I heard something rattling my storm window as if it was trying to break in. I look out and see nothing. After I stopped sneaking out in the summer, the light would stop. A few days ago I did not sneak out at night, and I saw a light shining through my window scanning them. Has anyone else experienced anything remotely similar to this? We lived in a brand new house for several years that had unexplained activity. The beds would move as if someone sat on it, or maybe an animal jumped out of the radio that was plugged in and would turn it on. Lots of little things that bother me the most. Then the shower was running. You could hear voices, like multiple voices talking and laughing. It creeped us way the heck out. When I would go to the bathroom during the night, I could not look at the mirror, as it was huge, ceiling to the counter wall to wall, and I would actually put my hand up to block the vision on my left. During the day, I would go out and think that I'm an idiot and that I'm fine. Then night would come, and I was afraid to go into these properties, since the house was new, or just an entity who randomly chooses that house, or can it be debunked? When I was 17, I saw the scariest thing in my life. My parents went out of town for the weekend, which wasn't a big deal for me, as they did that all the time. Well, I was home alone one Friday night at around 9 or 10 o'clock, and was starting to get a mild headache. My dad always kept the ibuprofen on his nightstand next to his bed, so I went to get some. When I turned on the light to the bedroom, I saw a black figure about 3 feet in height and 4 feet in front of me. I know this sounds cheesy,
but it had horns on its head, kind of like Batman, and long skinny feet. It moved so fluidly, like a mixture of smoke and water. I watched it run from in front of me around the bed and into the wall. The wall was the one wall I shared with my bedroom. I had other experiences in that apartment, but that one was by far the creepiest. This story started back in 2016. I was around 18 at the time. I loved watching ghost hunter shows. I'd been listening to creepy stories for a couple of years already, and started to watch horror movies, even though I ended up being scared for quite some time after them. But I was so interested and fascinated by this topic, I just couldn't let it go. I also believed in ghosts, spirits, entities, whatever you want to call them. There is no particular reason for why I do, and I hadn't had any encounters as a child. I'm sure I don't even have imaginary friends, but still. And even though I am a very empathetic person, I've never felt ghosts or anything like that, so I'm not meant to be a medium. But enough of me. Let's get on to the story. One night I laid in bed and watched some YouTube videos as usual. Suddenly, I felt a sensation in my room. You should know my bedroom is not very big, so if someone had entered it, I definitely would have noticed. I looked up from my computer and in the direction of where I felt the sensation. It was about 2.5 meters away from me, besides the door, directly in front of my bookshelf. If you could see my room, I could point to the exact spot from where I got that feeling from. But there was nothing, just air. I didn't see a shadow, a light, or anything. So I tried to shrug it off as my weird mind going off on its own again. But a couple of nights later I felt it once more. It was like someone was staring at me, motionless, just standing there watching me. Every time I felt this entity, I looked at the same spot. It was always in the exact same position, right in front of the bookshelf. The thing didn't move. It didn't do anything but watch me, or at least be in the room with me. And even though it didn't do anything, I felt so uneasy. In the beginning, the entity only came a couple of nights a month, but it soon came more often. It visited more and more days in a row. Sometimes it would be there for a whole week. There was no particular time when it came or when it left. Usually it was here when it was dark, and I laid in bed, and it didn't leave until I was asleep. It was never here when the sun was up, only when I was alone at night. I know this must sound like I was just paranoid and afraid of the dark, but I never had felt anything like that in my life. Yes, I did watch scary videos and movies, but I did that for years already. So why had something like that never happened to me before? Our house could not have been the reason why he came. My parents built it themselves, so there's no history to it, and there's no cemetery or anything like it underneath. I had also thought about the possibility of my grandparents visiting, but I figured I wouldn't feel so uneasy if it were them. I felt my grandfather before, but this was different. After some time of feeling it in my bedroom, I started to see a picture in my head whenever the entity was with me. I know this must sound weird, but I think in some way it told me what it looked like. Whenever it was here, I felt like it was a young male, between 30 and 35, very tall, slim, with dark hair and dark eyes. And for some reason, I felt like he was from the early 19th century. Maybe a soldier from a war.
I'm not sure, because it seemed like he was wearing a uniform. Again, I've never seen a shadow or anything like that, but in my head, it seems like this is what he looked like. And he always hunched over a bit, not like he was picking something up, more like he was sad and tired, perhaps even hurt. One night I'd had enough. I was so scared of him and was constantly thinking what he could possibly want from me. I wished that I could hear something, that he would say something to me, so that I could at least know what he wanted. So I decided to walk up to him the next time I felt him. A short time after, I felt him in my room again, the same spot as usual. So I stood up, walked towards him, and stopped right in front of him. I reached out my hand and said, "If you want to hurt me, this is your opportunity." I stood there with my hand reached out, and the back of my hand facing him, ready for him to touch or even hurt me. I waited. He did nothing. It was quiet, and we stood in front of each other just coexisting. I was very happy with the result. I smiled, thanked him, and got back to bed. I still felt him in my room, but I felt a little less uneasy that night. A couple of months later, in 2017 during the summer, my cousin and I spontaneously decided to go on a trip for 2 days. We went to a lake and stayed over at a small guest house. I was honestly a little happy to get away from my nightly visitor. Yes, that is what it had come to. I was so happy to be away because I was sure the ghost wouldn't follow me, or at least I'd hope not. In that one night that we stayed in the guest house, I had a dream. There was a tall, black figure just standing there looking at me. I couldn't see his face, just the outline of his shadow. I was 100% sure that it was the ghost from my room, but this time he had something with him. Not a person. It was big, a really big wolf. Not a dog, a wolf. It stood beside the ghost, like a pet dog stands by his owner. The wolf was so tall, it reached to the man's abdominal area, and it was so massive, not fat, just a really strong muscular body. I am sure that they belonged together. I could only see the shadow of the wolves as well, but it was scary nonetheless. I was so happy when I woke up, because I did not enjoy 1 second of that dream, that visit, whatever it was. A couple of days after I got home, I had a hard time falling asleep. That night, I turned around in my bed for so long, I thought I would never sleep that night. Finally, at some point, I managed to reach sweet slumber, but not for long. I woke up a couple of minutes later, but only to find myself in some sort of sleep paralysis. I heard of it a couple of times before, but I was sure that this was not just sleep paralysis. What made mine so different is what happened during the time I couldn't move. I laid there, unable to do anything, but I could see and hear and feel everything else, and unfortunately, it was not the nothingness of my dark room. At first, I noticed a sound, a breathing sound, not from a person, from an animal. Not from any animal. It was the breathing sound of a wolf. And the second thing I noticed was the wind that blew across my face. The wolf sniffed my face. I could feel his every breath running across my skin. My eyes were wide open, but I could only see the ceiling. No wolf. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, and even my breath was limited. But somehow I managed to clench a fist, raise my arm, and punch right above my face where the wolf's head was. As soon as I did that, it was over. When my arm flew over my head, the wolf was gone. The breathing was gone. The paralysis was gone. I sat up and looked around, but there was only my empty room. I was so terrified that I crawled under the blanket and pulled it up to my chin, even though it was a hot summer night. But I couldn't feel comfortable in any other way that night. After that incident, I never felt the wolf in my room again. The man came to visit me a few more times, but he did nothing but stand and watch from my bookshelves as usual. I left to become an au pair for a year that September, and was curious if the ghost would follow me, but he didn't. From time to time I had to think about him, when I thought about going back home, and if he'd still be there. Ever since I'm back, I haven't felt he's with me. It's like he never existed, besides the memories I have. Now I know that it was stupid to tell the ghost that he could hurt me if he wanted to. I've heard stories where ghosts push, punch, and scratch people. Even a story where a ghost killed someone, and I believe them all. But I just had to know if he wanted to hurt me as well. But I know that it was one of the most stupid ideas to try and punch a wolf. You don't punch ghosts. But in that moment, I was so afraid. It was like a panic mechanism. Maybe it all was in my head. Maybe there never was anyone in my room. Maybe I had imagined it or become paranoid because of all the creepy stories I listened to. But if so, why didn't it happen before? Why doesn't it happen now? And the sleep paralysis? If it was what I thought, or I was kept being possessed by the wolf ghost, this was not the usual sleep paralysis. At least I think so. Do you feel anything like that when you're in sleep paralysis? This has never happened to me before or ever again, only at the time where the animal was there and sniffed my face. I wish I knew what the ghost and his pet wolf wanted, what they tried to do, or if there was anything that I could have done to help them. Maybe they didn't know that they were dead and wandered around the earth without any chance of going onto the other side. I wish I knew. If anyone has ever experienced something like that, what would you do in a situation like this? And to the man and his wolf, I hope we never meet again. One night when I was 10, I was asleep in bed and was woken up by my bedroom door opening, then someone sitting on my bed. I felt the graze on my leg, and then the bed sink as they sat. Thinking it was my mum having to tell me something, I opened my eyes only to see a pale, eyeless, just black, empty sockets boy who was seeming to be my age sitting at the foot of my bed with his legs crossed, staring at me, or facing in my direction since he had no eyes. He then reached his hand towards me, and he was holding what looked like a little black box. I was freaked out, but as I reached to grab it, he hesitantly pulled back. I reached out further for it and said, "Give it." As I did so, I blinked, and by the time I reopened my eyes, he was gone. The spot of the bed where he was sitting lifted back into place, but the imprint of someone sitting there was still present. I told my mum in the morning, and she was slightly freaked out but assured me I was just dreaming. Fast forward 5 years. I had my girlfriend over to do homework. After homework, she took a nap while she waited for her parents to pick her up. When they arrived, I tried waking her to let her know. I nudged her, and she opened her eyes so suddenly, already looking in the direction of the corner of the room where the walls meet the ceiling. She lifted her finger and pointed, and as fast as she woke, she fell asleep again. I attempted to wake her up, and she came to full consciousness, and I asked her what the hell that was about, and she explained what she just did. Oh, I thought I was dreaming, but up on the wall I saw a little boy with no eyes, just there in a Spider-Man pose staring at me. That's when I freaked out, and told her the story, for the first time, of when I saw the same kid. Fast forward another 5 years, still with the same girlfriend, and by this time we had a 2-year-old daughter. We were living in my old bedroom at my parents' house, and my daughter would wake up at the very same time every night and start talking. For a while we thought it was a normal baby thing, until I noticed it was almost the same conversation every night. I playfully asked her one night who she was talking to. She responded, "A little boy. He talks to me. He's nice. He's lost his mummy." I told my mum what happened the next morning, and before I got to tell her what I thought, she said, "I remember when that happened to you, then your girlfriend. I have no idea what that is." By then, neither my girlfriend or I have seen the little boy after our first encounter. But my daughter continued her nightly conversations until we got a place of our own later that year. So I've been living in a house with paranormal activity on and off for about 4 years. The occasional footsteps, random things falling, sleep paralysis. But I guess Mr. Ghost has decided to level up. Mega Ghost. First, he tried to mimic my cat. It was summertime, so I decided to sleep in the spare bedroom in the basement, my brother's room, because it's colder there. Mind you, my cat never sleeps in my room overnight, and my door is always closed. While I was sleeping, I felt an animal jump on my bed and sleep right against my thigh like my cat usually does. I was scared, so I kept my eyes closed for a few minutes, and when I got the courage to turn on my lights, nothing was there. There was also, on one night, my brother was visiting from university, and he texted me asking why I was crying, as his bedroom is directly under mine. And it was only me, him, and my cousin at home. Our cousin was playing on the PS4, so it couldn't have been him. I told my brother that I wasn't crying, and he didn't believe me, saying that it sounded exactly like my cry the day prior. The day before I was sobbing because of a reason I'd rather not get into, but I was over it within a few hours, and that it sounded like it was coming from my room. The third and most recent incident happened yesterday. My mum and dad left early in the morning to go for a day trip. My aunt woke up and heard my mum talking and laughing. My aunt assumed that my mum hadn't left yet, and that she was on the phone. My aunt knew that they were supposed to leave in the morning, and was curious as to why they were still here. When she realized that they had already left, she scheduled a prayer at the house ASAP. I've never necessarily felt threatened by any of these paranormal experiences, but I feel like mimicking family members is a little much. Does anyone have any similar stories or experiences? Is this a ward or a ghost? When I was 3 or 4, my grandmother passed away, and soon after, all my extended family flew into town to have the funeral. A week after the funeral, some relatives were still in town, including my uncle and his family. My grandmother wanted us to sell the house after she passed, so my family did just that. It was hectic, because we were trying to pack everything up. Meanwhile, everyone still had to go to work and school. On one of the days that we had to pack up the house, my parents both had work, my older cousins had school, and my uncles and aunts had jobs and other stuff. However, my uncle, my grandma's oldest son, was able to watch me a couple of hours, so he did. According to him, I asked him to go into the bathroom while he was watching TV. The closest bathroom was in my grandparents' old room, so I went there. When I came back, I asked my uncle who the nice lady was on the bed. He kinda played along with it, because he thought it might have been an imaginary friend or something. He asked me questions about her to entertain me. I described her as a dark-haired, kinda white, and wearing a blue nightgown. When I said that, my uncle freaked out, because my grandmother always wore a light blue nightgown to sleep. After that, my uncle and I left the house and waited outside for my parents to return. I had just moved back to my hometown after attending an art school for 2 years. The only apartment I could find was a really dumpy loft over a warehouse for $50 a month. This was in 1971, way before these kinds of apartments were cool. This was cheap, even for back then, and though I wondered a bit about it, it wasn't totally out of the norm. It did have tall windows and skylights, so it worked great for a studio. Since it was a loft with a big wide open space, with the bathroom being the only room, there were 2 other doors, one to the stairs down to the street, and the fire escape that had one of those fire alarms on it if you go out of it. The bathroom was like a box/cubicle, with a shower and sink and toilet. I had been living there for about a month, when one night I woke up and went to use the bathroom. The door had a small side lock on it, and I always locked it out of habit. Just as I was about to leave, I heard heavy footsteps walk up to the bathroom door, and I watched in horror as the doorknob turned and rattled, shaking the whole door. It was for the first time in my life where I was so scared that I actually felt my body go completely numb. I thought for sure that someone had gotten in, and I was now going to be killed. The lock was a little wimpy thing that a granny could have broken into. The doorknob rattled several more times, and then something hit the door really hard. I then heard the footsteps walk away and go back down the stairs. I heard the door to the street open and close, and then silence. I think it took me nearly 30 minutes to get the courage to leave the little bathroom. When I finally did, I turned on every light in that place and went to inspect the door to the street. There were 3 locks on that door. 2 of them could only be locked from the inside, and those were locked. Nothing could have come in or gone out that way. I even checked the fire escape, but it was locked in a similar way. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. As it turns out, that was the scariest thing to happen in that loft. After that, I would hear footsteps and doors open and close all the time. A few other not so scary things as well. That place convinced me, and quite a few other people, that these things were real. I ended up living there for 3 years and would have stayed longer, but the place got sold and the new owner wanted to move into the lofts themselves. They only lived there for 2 months before moving out. The cowards. On Christmas Day, my great-grandmother was hospitalized due to an infection caused by her kidney dialysis. She went downhill from there and passed away in the morning of January 16th. To start the whole thing off, my grandfather had loaded a bunch of Johnny Reed onto his iPod for her to listen to while she was in the hospital. He did so, brought the iPod home the night before to charge it, the night before she passed away. He was awoken at 7 a.m. to his iPod playing Dance With Me, her favorite song. They went to the hospital, and she passed 2 hours later. At Christmas Eve, we had a family gathering with all of her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. There are 4 great-grandchildren, and she has contacted 3 of us. The first was my little cousin Barry. He often has night terrors and runs into his parents' room crying. And 2 nights after she'd passed away, Barry walks into his parents' room and asks them, "What does see ya mean?" They explained and asked why. He responded with, "Grammy came to visit and said see ya." The second was my other little cousin, who lives on the other side of Canada, Madison. She wasn't yet told about her great-grandmother's passing away, but she had been telling her mother and father about a rainbow angel that she had been playing with. She does not scare her, but calms her. The third was me. 2 days ago during the funeral, I was sitting in the front row, about 10 minutes before it was going to start. As clear as day in my right ear, I heard her say, "Bye, honey," like she would always say when I was leaving her house. It was clear enough that it made me turn and look. It is personally relieving that she isn't going through the dialysis treatments anymore, as it caused her more suffering than anything else. But I will miss her more than anything. These events have just come as a surprise to me, because very few members of my family believe in paranormal things.